what are some of the things that you've used throughout the course of your marriage and in your relationships that have really helped you, use conflict as a way, as a mechanism for growth?
There's several different tools that I use that I have developed over time. My favorite and most used is what I also train my clients in litigation is let your breath be the first word that you say. So you think of your breath as where a word would be, you just put a breath and you lead with that in your sentence. So if somebody is going to say something that's going to make you defensive, instead of going, I didn't say that. That's not what I said. And you immediately just boom, 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 boom. You've now ratcheted up 5 levels. Instead, when you have a breath where they say something ugly and I did not say that. Now you have way more control. Now you have a much more firmer grasp. So that helps you control yourself. Another tool or thought that I allow myself to use is I just picture words that are not helpful. I just let them fall to the ground. You picture as their words coming out. If they're not helpful, they just fall. We have this fear that we have to catch every single thing that somebody says, as if it's tennis. We have to hit it right back. It's baseball. We got to catch it. We got to swing. Some pitches are balls. Not everything is a strike. And so if you're just swinging at every pitch that's thrown, it's going to tire you out. It's going to frustrate you. It's going to frustrate the other person. And you're going to hit a foul, if we're going to go with the baseball metaphor here. And so when you have the ability to understand just because you said something does not mean I have to say something. Not everything you said deserves a response. You don't have to attend every argument that you're invited to. There is a wisdom and a peace and a comfort and a confidence that comes with knowing I don't have to say anything that I don't want to say. And often that gives you an immense sense of confidence going into the conflict.
In the context of speaking with authority and conviction and standing up for yourself to somebody, what have you found to be an effective way to do so without being disrespectful?
Well, I see two sides of that question. There is what we just talked about, the person's desire to feel acknowledged, to feel heard. And you can do that with phrases like, that's helpful for me to know. I've learned that X is important to you, or I understand that this is important to you. And you can lower their barrier that way. But to continue to stand up for you, there's got to be a boundary. There's a lot of, I'm going to use the word peace that and clarity that comes with putting a frame around your life and around the conversation. That means you are focusing what is in it and excluding what is not. Just like you would put a frame around a piece of art, you are enhancing what's inside it. So if you want to put up a boundary with somebody's pushing your buttons, you need to say no, you need to stand up for it. You're using assertive language. So what I like to give it for people is you're giving them a manual rather than giving them a remote. So instead of letting them control your behavior by pushing all your buttons, you're telling them, I don't accept the way you talk to me. So there's a difference in saying, you can't talk to me that way. I don't allow people to speak to me that way. So, or even stronger, somebody says, you can't speak to me that way. I don't respond to that. Like it's just this shift of this reactive versus responding in a way that keeps you grounded by having a boundary of what's important to you and how you're going to speak and how you're going to assert yourself in the conversation.
So in real time, if you and I, let's just pretend we're actually having coffee right now,
Oh yeah, coffee sounds good. I need some.
and you say something to me about something, and I go, "That sounds really stupid of you." What would be the instead of you? What would be like the real time like response to me in that situation?
So there's two that come to mind. Um, let's assume that we are friends, that we know each other. We're good. My immediate reaction would be, was was that meant to be hurtful, or were you just being funny? Get that to clarify. I'm giving them that grace of, yeah, I know you didn't mean to I know you didn't mean to insult me. Now, if we're not friends, I'm going to let that linger, give it 5 seconds of quiet, and then repeat what you just said or ask you to repeat what you just said. So if you said something, and for example, if I just had quiet, I could say, "So that sounds stupid to you." And all I'm doing is repeating it, and then they go, "Well, what I meant was blah 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 blah." So, but what you're doing is saying, "Hey, this is I'm standing here. I'm standing right here, and I'm not moving. So understand, if I don't like something, I will push it back, rather than me continue to carry your words and me feel less and less and less of myself."
So we talked about like how like the biggest asset you can have is using your breath and practicing the pause before saying anything in the midst of high conflict situations or conversations like we just went over. Is the opposite also true? Because you hear a lot of people, and I've definitely been guilty of this, is like the tick for tack. Like somebody says something to you and then you try to one up with them with something else, and it's just this never ending battle to the bottom, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a race to the bottom is exactly what it is. Yeah.
Is that the biggest mistake you see people make, is just this tick for tack approach when they're
Yeah, it's this perception that you have to win the argument, when my advice is always never win the argument. That winning an argument is not a thing. If you win an argument, you've won contempt. You've won regret. You've won resentment. It's a lose lose game. What you've really lost is that person's respect. You might have lost the relationship, the connection that you once had, because you thought that saying that hurtful thing was going to make you win. It was going to end the conversation. Like in a negotiation, the advice is the person who speaks loses, right? Well, in a relationship you want to build, it's typically the person who speaks last loses because you went too far. I mean, you ratchet, you ratchet. So as soon as, let's say you said something to me, Doug, that was at a louder tone. If I go louder than you, in my mind, I'm winning. I need to beat you. Well, I've now just done two things. I've justified your ability to go even louder. I've also just confirmed every fear that you had about me. I've now confirmed every thought you had. I am rude. I am ugly because I haven't denied it. I've just given you all the tools and resources to feel even more afraid. So I am it's like it doesn't make sense to me that how would you respond to a threat with a bigger threat? Often that does not create connection with the other person. It doesn't. It just makes them not like you more. So that's kind of the advice that I always fall back to, is that if you win an argument, your priorities are in the wrong place. It is a race to the bottom. Whenever you just ratchet it, eventually it hits a tipping point. The sympathetic turns into the parasympathetic. The ratchet, the fight or flight, you did something you fought too hard. You threw that very hurtful word. And now it's the cooling point where you feel regret, you feel dread, you feel sad, and you go, I just feel bad about the whole thing. And then you focus on what matters, but you should have done it in reverse.
yeah, there's nothing that drives somebody more nuts, like in the midst of a high conflict conversation, is when the other person says like nothing, and they kind of walk away, and it really drives that. Like, I can't believe they're not reacting and responding
Yeah.
to how I am, right? And it's like sometimes when you send like a hurtful text and the other person
Right.
just doesn't respond, you just send more and more and
Yeah.
more
It's
trying to get
killer.
somebody to
Yeah,
answer.
because you
Like,
wanted that dopamine, right? You wanted
right.
that, like you wanted that, like, "Ah, yes, they are fighting back with me."
And you feel
But it's awful.
powerless now because you feel like that person has gained authority over you because they're not giving in to
Exactly.
what you want. Like, why are we so driven to not walk away from arguments, even though deep down we know that that's how we gain respect, authority, value through somebody else's eyes, is by knowing when to walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what's worth your time? And exactly right. You can shoot that text that you thought was a zinger, right? You thought you just sent that zinger of a text, and then they don't respond to it. And all of a sudden, when 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes go by, it feels less and less like a zinger and more like you're wearing, the dummy hat of like, why did I send that? This doesn't make, and now you're frustrated. Now you realize, oh, they just have full control over my emotions. Now I feel like I'm not anywhere where I need to be. Meanwhile, they look like they're calm, cool, and the bigger person.
And do you think that's like an ego thing that like people their ego gets in the way, their self-esteem gets in the way, and that's why they feel they just can't walk away, and they feel that if they're not winning this argument or being quote unquote right, that it's just a reflection of how they feel about themselves?
That's part of it. I think it's part of a bigger picture. It has a lot to do with your upbringing, I think, and just what you saw as conflict. It's some people, I grew up in homes like my house. My parents didn't really argue in front of us. They went in another room, if they needed to have some words. There are other people who had it all out right there in the open. Didn't matter where they were. It could be at a restaurant, it could be at the house, it could be in front of other kids. So conflict looks different to other people. And some people have grown up in that very toxic argument behavior where they do say the terrible things, where they understand the really bad arguments as a process of feelings or to get it out. And so it's relative really to how they grew up. So ego is part of it, but a lot I think too is what they learned and imitated to see as their measure of this is how to handle conflict. They weren't taught or equipped better ways.
What do you think gets in the way of that? Is it when somebody wasn't raised in a way that modeled healthy conflict, they get into conflicts as adults. A lot of times there's physical symptoms that come along with the conflict because you're in fight or flight mode. Do you think that is harder for people to deal with, or is it the lack of understanding on healthy conversation tactics in the midst of something like that?
Well, I think the behavior is learned. I mean, I don't think, we're born to say no, to not like. I got 2 kids. I didn't need to teach them how to argue with me. They just did it. You want them to have this certain food. No, I don't want this. It's their favorite word growing up. No, that doesn't need to be taught. It's just within our system. But the people who that's what they grew up with are these toxic behaviors, I think are much more prone to not knowing how to handle it. And on the other side, there are people that were taught it. They just find that when they behave a certain way, they get their sense of power. They get their sense of ego. They think this is what success is. They think this is what it is to achieve and to overcome and be machismo with it all. I think there is a fine line between using what you know and falling back to what you think works.
And so for more difficult scenarios like the ones that you're talking about, harder conversations, people who are quote unquote difficult, is it the same playbook? Take the breath, practice the pause. It's the same thing.
It's a lot of the same thing, except you know when to walk away very quickly, because their words can be much more harmful. Understanding that when you're dealing with somebody who's a narcissistic type, it is a game in a sense. They either want to provoke you or they want the praise from you, and there's a line that comes with that. So it's more of informing them when they're in those situations and giving them a sense of, just because you walk away does not mean you're a bad person. Just because you need to step away from a conversation does not mean that you've lost. Often it's you've won. You've won that your peace of mind. And what are you walking away from, or what are you walking away with? And that's the difference.
Obviously, in your line of work, it can be easy to feel manipulated, feel like your reality can be warped, and that maybe your truth isn't your truth. You question whether or not what you're thinking is actually what's going on because of just the dynamics of a court case, or maybe what another lawyer might be saying to you, or whatever. And I think this also happens a lot in these more difficult conversations where, because of the words of somebody else and what they're saying to them, the person could have started out great, felt confident, felt, you know, like they had a level of self-respect, but now they're like, "Oh no, like maybe is this person right? Like, am I really doing those things?" How do you maintain that balance to where you're able to understand whether or not somebody's words to you are actually true and that, you know, you're not questioning your own reality in that situation?
Well, that touches on the elements of gaslighting, right? Of somebody actually coming in and trying to take advantage of you by distorting your sense of reality and truth. What comes to mind is twofold. Really, you maintain that balance by understanding who you are and loving who you are. Often we want to look to other people for that validation of love because we have a hard time loving ourselves. And if the more you are good with who you are, the more you're okay with, I'm okay if you misunderstand me. I'm okay. You know, if that's what you need to do, you go do it. I'll let you. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to take down anything else that I have. So there's that sense of loving who you are. The second end of that is to be firm. Often when I talk about it in terms of people who want to break up your self-esteem, who try to gaslight you in certain ways, it's somewhat like the laser pointer with a cat, right? They want to jump you from place to place to place, even though you get there and there's no laser. It's all just distraction. It's manipulation. In that sense, you need to stand still and be still. And one of the best ways to do that is to use phrases that I teach are I remember things differently. I see that differently. I take another approach. It's often just using and repeating the same phrases. Repeating means that you're standing still because they might bring something up to you and you have that knee jerk reaction and go, "That's not what happened. That's not what I said. That's not true." Well, you're just jumping around to where they want you, and it's not where that is. Versus if I just repeat what I said, I see things differently. They want to distract you. You just repeat, I see things differently. You're standing still. It's like the person who's not responding to that text. You're saying, I got control over me, and that's the only person who does.
Do you think there's benefit to saying? 'Cause one of the things I've used in the past is like, it's okay. Like, you have your truth, I have my truth. You have your perception of reality, I have my perception of reality. Neither are right or wrong, but we're gonna have to agree or to disagree on this. Like, do you think that saying something like that can be effective, or am I not being assertive enough?
It depends on the situation. It depends how much this person matters to you. Often I like to use an opening of, is this something we have to agree on? I use that a lot. I say a lot. I mean, I use that as an opening frequently. Is this something we have to agree on? Almost always the answer is no, because then it keys you into priority. Is this something that matters? Is this something we really want to fight over? The second answer is if it is something you need to agree on. The question is that something we need to agree on now, at this exact moment, at this exact second, or if we wait until tomorrow or next week, is the world going to shut down? And so it is timing is a big aspect because often people will try to push you into conversations. And the problem you fall into is when you agree to get into the ring, when you're not ready, you're tired, you're hungry, you haven't worked out that day. You have built up tension. You don't go into the match if you're not prepared for it. So often you're just not ready. So you need to make sure that when you are, it's the conversation happens on your schedule, not theirs.
And is there anything that somebody can do beforehand before entering into a planned discussion that may get heated? Like, for instance, if people who are dating get into some sort of argument, and they're like, "Let's take some space, come back in an hour, 2 hours, whatever." Is there any kind of best practices for being able to make sure you're coming together in a healthy way?
What I try to tell people is use a frame around the conversation. You frame it, which is somewhat similar to others who talk about this, but it is calling your shot, is what I say it. like an old baseball player. You're pointing to left field, going, "That's where we're going." So right at the beginning of the conversation, say, "I want you to know that before we talk about this, at the end of this conversation," that's key. At the end of this conversation, I still love you. I still care about you. I still want to be friends. I still want to do this. And then you go into, so here's what we want to talk about. So you make it very short and concise of what you are to talk about. But what you're doing is eliminating the unknowns. Often somebody in a conversation you have start to feel fear of, like, if I say what I really want to say, am I going to lose this person? Well, you remove that barrier when you say, "Hey, I want to have a discussion with you about X, Y, and Z, but just know at the end of it, I'm still going to respect who you are. We're still going to choose to love each other." And it's like you're getting their permission and their acknowledgement, and now they know the parameters. Now they know the discussion. It's much harder when you go, "Hey, we need to talk." Talk about what? Anything. You know? How does it end? Who knows? Yeah, that all it does is bring anxiety of, I have no idea where we're going. And so that's what you're leaving an open pasture for you just to roam. That's what the conversation lasts forever because there's no fence. You're just going wherever it goes. And then you realize, wow, where did this even start? How did we even get to this point? So if you come in from a frame, you're going to be much stronger because you're giving people less choices. Like if you're going to, like as a kid, pick out a pair of shoes. If you have like 30 shoes on the wall, you're going to take a whole lot more time. But if I give you two, here's the two subjects we want to talk about. Well, that's much easier to digest. And then it makes conversations feel a lot more productive once you've chosen one, you know?
I know you probably don't want to be overly structured with some of these conversations, especially if it's like in a romantic setting. But do you think that there's benefit to having some sort of time limit within that frame so that the other person makes sure that they're feeling heard too, and they don't feel like the other person who maybe is setting the tone for the conversation is taking up a bunch of time to talk, and then now an hour has gone by, somebody's got to go to work, somebody's got to take care of the kids, whatever the example is. Do you think there's an effective way to make sure that both people can hear each other out?
Yeah. I mean, one tactic is to say, okay, I'm going to let I'm giving you 5 minutes. Here's my phone. We're going to agree. You get 5 minutes to say whatever you want to say, and I'm not going to say a word. Whatever is on your mind about this, you get to say it all. And then I get 5 minutes, and I get to say all that I want. And then at the end of it, that's the end of it. We're not going to bring it up again. I mean, you get to lay those parameters as a couple, as a relationship, of if that works for you or not. But what it does make sure is you get to say what you want, and I'm not going to be defensive about it. We're both just going to vent, pour it out, get it out, because often that's all you needed to do anyway, is just to get it out.
What about like non-physical cues, body language? We talked at the beginning when somebody's trying to in conversation, gain authority, respect, value from somebody, eye contact, chest up, shoulders back. I mean, you also hear a lot about people who like, they cross their arms, that can give off a certain. So what are some tips you have for body language?
Well, again, it depends on the person, how familiar you are. Like I know when my brother is mad, way before anybody else knows. I you know of sisters who can like come home from a first date and you're like, she hated him. As soon as she walks through the door, they just know. So crossing the arms, yeah, that's a classic. Just any closed position where either my body's turned away from you, my face is turned away from you, my eyes are looking away from you. Anything that says I'm not wanting to directly engage. Now, that doesn't all the time mean that you're not wanting to engage. Maybe you're thinking of something. Maybe looking at somebody's eyes bothers you. I'll tell people typically try to look at their eyebrows. People can't tell the difference. So if that really sets you off, you can look at their eyebrows and they really won't know. Especially if you're standing farther away. People who have a bigger breath, so I mean, that's just that longer, big exhale that you can tell. Okay, they're not in a good state of mind. Maybe their fists are clenched or they're real fidgety. But again, if maybe if you have ADHD, that's you're on a whole different spectrum. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be able to. Yeah, that's much harder to tell. So it generally just goes with the vibe. Like in my view, everybody comes into an argument or a conversation with a particular frequency, just like a radio station. And can you tap into that radio frequency, turn the knob, and get there or not? So that's the real cue.
What's the best way for somebody to know if somebody's actually telling them the truth?
That's a great question. There's a lot of misconception out there. Going to your point about eye movements, there's a lot of misconception out there that there are what's known as micro movements or micro responses that tell you whether someone is lying or not. You can't count on those micro gestures. You can't count on being able to apply one rule to all people, especially not one rule to all populations or all ethnicities or all cultures, because every culture is different. In Japan, for example, they don't make eye contact. They look down because that's a sign of respect. So if you try to apply the idea that micro gestures in the United States apply to Japanese people, you're going to think everyone's lying to you, when in fact they're just trying to be respectful, right? So I do not, and I was not taught to accept these micro movements of the face as a form of detecting lies or fabrication. Instead, what we're taught is to use actual communication skills to determine whether someone is lying to you or not. So, for example, if you're talking to somebody that you know very well, let's say it's a brother or a spouse or a coworker, somebody that you have what's known as a baseline about. Baseline means that you've been with this person through many different varieties of emotion, of stress, of time of day, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, in a nutshell, you know what's normal, and then you know what's not normal. When you have a baseline, the way that you can tell whether somebody's lying to you or not is by measuring the variance between how they respond to your question or how they respond in the moment against that baseline. So if you see someone speaking to you and they seem more anxious, if you see someone speaking to you and they seem calmer, if they have a greater variance from the baseline of what you're normally seeing from them, then you know that there's a higher likelihood that you're not getting the complete truth, because their variance from the baseline is significant. When you're talking to somebody who is a complete stranger, you have no baseline when they're a complete stranger. So you can't count on variance from baseline as your tool. Instead, what you have to use is the actual physical words that are coming out of their mouth. So when someone is talking to you and they're a stranger and you want to determine whether or not they're being truthful or not, you have to lean on a set of skills called elicitation. Elicitation is a much more comprehensive set of skills than we can talk about in one interview. But what I will say is this, as some very basic tools. When someone tells you something and you're trying to see whether or not it's truthful or not, the first thing that you can do is just repeat back to them what they said to you later in the conversation. So if somebody said, hey, these windows are going to reduce the amount of solar energy that gets into your house by 25%, some salesperson who's knocking on your door, right? 15 minutes into the conversation, you can ask them, how much will this reduce the solar energy in my house? And if they say 20%, then now you know that they're lying to you. Or if they say 40%, then you know that they're lying to you. Or if you come back and say, you said that these would reduce the amount of solar energy in my house by 35%, right? If they simply just agree with you, again, you can see that they're lying to you, right? So a lot of times, one of the best ways to tell whether a stranger is lying to you or not is by using elicitation techniques. Some of those techniques are repeating what they said back to them, falsely repeating what they said back to them, meaning they said 25%, but you're going to repeat 35%. You're looking for, again, variations in the specific detailed content. Whether we're with baseline, people that you have a baseline on, you're looking for a variance against the baseline. When you don't have a baseline, you're looking for variance against the information. But what you're definitely not doing is looking for micro expressions and micro gestures in the face.
Is there a way to tell if somebody's just legitimately like nervous, like isn't good at having hard conversations versus whether or not they're lying?
No, that's an important thing to understand too, Doug. One of the big reasons why I do not encourage, and I was not taught micro expressions as the primary method is for exactly that reason. You don't know what the other person's perspective of this experience is. Are they nervous because they're intimidated by you? Are they excited because you pose some kind of unique opportunity for them? Are they just feeling sick because they just got over a virus or they had a bad, cupcake at lunch? You have no idea where they're coming from. So the last thing you can do is start to assume that their behavior is an indication of fabrication. Instead, what you need to do is understand that their behavior is just one data point of multiple data points that can lead to an assessment about whether or not they're being truthful and honest with you. My children are young. I have an 11-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. My son will oftentimes tell me something that isn't true, but it's not because he's not trying to lie to me. He is honestly representing what he believes is the truth. He doesn't remember when I told him to brush his teeth after dinner. I told him that. He looked in my face and said, "I'll brush my teeth." But in his brain, he was thinking about 9 other things because he's 11 years old. And as soon as he walked up the stairs, brushing his teeth fell off the top of the list, and checking his email or looking at his phone or drawing a new picture, something else took that first place spot. It's easy as a parent that you want to assume your child was lying to you when they said they would brush their teeth, when in reality, their brain is just moving at a faster pace than their level of commitment. The same thing is true for adults, because as much as we may not want to accept it, a 45-year-old man is really just a 13-year-old boy in a 45-year-old body. And depending on how much training and exercise and maturity that 45-year-old man has gone through, he may not be much more mature than the prepubescent child that was.
I've heard you talk about the difference between like how to spot a good liar versus a bad liar. I mean, I would love for you to explain that because I would love for you to explain that because I think the audience would get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that's interesting, right? Because you have to consider a good liar versus a bad liar, but you also have to consider a trained liar against an untrained liar. Because you can be a bad liar who is trained, or you can be a good liar who is untrained. So when it comes to these people who are using deception, you have to be open to 2 different types, right? So I think a bad liar is a good place to start. Somebody who is a bad liar can't keep their facts straight. So they can't remember the lie that they just said 5 minutes ago. So they said that they would be there at 3:00. You asked what time they're coming over, and they said, "How about 4:00?" I mean, it's easy to find a bad liar. If anything, bad liars give us all a false sense of security about how good we are at lie detection. So bad liars are fairly easy to find. They can't keep their facts straight. They physically show that they're nervous or uncomfortable during a conversation. They are very divergent from baseline. So if your bad liar is a friend or a brother or a sibling or a coworker, you know how different they behave when they're lying. So a bad liar is easy. A good liar is a little bit more difficult because a good liar means that they are naturally proficient at deception. And for the most part, when people are naturally proficient at deception, it's because they grew up in an environment where deception was part of their survival, right? So they grew up in a family that was abusive, or they grew up in a traumatic childhood, or they grew up in a place where deception was required for success. So you're talking about somebody who from the age of 9, 10, 11 years old has been actively exercising and learning from the school of hard knocks how to tell effective lies. So a good liar is a much harder person to crack. And it becomes very, very important that you learn the skills of elicitation, you learn the skills of measuring baseline, you learn how to keep your own facts straight, your own solid memory palace, if you will, so that you can test a good liar against the mistakes that they will for sure make. Because a good liar will still make mistakes. They will just make fewer mistakes than a bad liar. So you have to actively engage someone that you suspect is a good liar because they're good, but they're not necessarily trained. So now we have to make the flip to the trained versus untrained liar, right? Your untrained liar can be either good or bad. But here's what's important. An untrained liar always makes mistakes. That's because they're untrained. So they're not prepared. They're usually lying in a reactive method, which means they haven't thought their lie through. They know that they're going to be dishonest, but they don't know exactly how they're going to be dishonest. So they go into something kind of winging it. So that's why they make mistakes. If they're good, they make less mistakes, but they still make mistakes. If they're bad, they make lots of mistakes and they're caught. So an untrained liar is easier to find, easier to crack than a good liar, but not as easy to crack as a bad untrained liar. So now you've got your perfect combination of bad scenario is a good trained liar. And really, when you're dealing with a good trained liar, somebody who's naturally inclined to lie and trained in how to lie, your best opportunity is to identify the fact that this person's story is too tight. Their behavior is too confident. Their level of accuracy is too accurate. Because here's the truth. When someone's telling you the truth takes no effort. So when you and I are having a conversation, I'm telling you the truth, it's easy for us to have that conversation. I can actually multitask in my brain. I can be thinking about dinner with my kids. I can be thinking about my next business meeting at the same time that I'm having a conversation with you where I'm being honest. So it doesn't take a great deal of effort to be honest. But when you're with someone who is a good trained liar, one of the big telltale signs that they are lying is that you see a great deal of focus and a great deal of effort that goes into the fact that they're telling you what seems like the truth. They are not making mistakes. They're not varying much from their baseline, but you can see that they're putting a lot of effort into this conversation. That is a very good sign that you're dealing with somebody who is a trained and natural or good liar. That was, again, a lot of conversation there to go through those 4 different options, Doug. Is there any one of those that you want to dig into more? Did that kind of capture what you were looking for?
That definitely captured what I was looking for, because I mean, one of the other things that you've heard is if somebody is like over explaining too much, like their answer or their response, or having to over justify why they did something, you hear that typically that person isn't telling the truth. Is that accurate?
So again, that goes back to our point about us assuming behaviors equal dishonesty. I mean, detail-oriented people, they just tell more details. I don't know about you. I'm married, and I'm married to somebody who is my polar opposite. I am a conceptual person. So the polar opposite of me, my wife, is a very detail-oriented person. So when she asks me, "How was your weekend?" I can literally just say, "It was good." When I ask her, "How was your weekend?" she says, "Well, first on Saturday morning, I woke up a little bit sleepy because the kids woke me up at such and such. And then I brushed my teeth. And while I was brushing my teeth, I remembered that I have to take them to the grocery store." She's just a detail-oriented person. So for me, I can encapsulate the entire weekend by saying it was good. For her, she literally has to replay the entire weekend. So you can't assume that somebody who over-explains is telling you a lie. You can't assume that. What you can do is you can measure a baseline, and you can check facts by measuring content like we talked about. But it's a mainstream misconception that just because they use too many words means that they're telling something that is a fabrication.
Right. And so one of the other misconceptions I've heard you talk about when it comes to picking up on cues and picking up on whether or not somebody's telling you the truth or not is the fact that you think that, most of the time you shouldn't trust your gut. Talk about why you think that and what people should do instead.
So when people talk about trusting their gut, or when someone encourages you to trust your gut, what they're saying is that you should basically lean into your perception of the world, lean into your worldview. But we've already discussed, like, your worldview is biased. Your worldview is limited. Your lens that you use is flawed. It's not as accurate as the true world around you. It's subjective, not objective. So if anything, we're encouraged at CIA never to trust our gut, because your gut is the most untrustworthy thing in your body. Consider the fact that the human brain, your brain and mine, is inherently lazy. The human brain does not like to work hard. Like people who procrastinate, there's nothing wrong with them. That is the natural way of doing things. Every single human being procrastinates something in some way. We wait until the latest possible minute to brush our teeth. We wait until the latest possible minute to go to the bathroom. We wait until the latest possible minute to stop doing the things that we love to do. Like we inherently procrastinate because the human brain does not like to use extra energy to accomplish a task. It likes to use the minimum amount of energy to accomplish a task. So the way that you often achieve that is by waiting until the last minute before you actually make a decision. Waiting until the last minute before you think something through, waiting until the last minute before you consider somebody else's point of view. So trusting your gut means doing what your body finds natural, which is inherently the laziest, least energetic thing that you can do because the human brain is built for survival. So there's lots of reasons why you should not trust your gut. Instead, what you should trust is what we call something, we call it assessment versus assumption. Assessment is what you should be doing. And the process of gaining or of creating an assessment means that you are constantly collecting data, especially cognitive dissonant data, which means conflicting data. You're constantly collecting data and processing that data intentionally so that you can create a current and viable perspective on what's happening around you. So if you're getting ready to have a conversation with your boss, or if you're getting ready to have a conversation with your spouse, you want to actively and intentionally be collecting information from all around you. Simple example, if you have a conversation with your spouse at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's very different than if you have a conversation with your spouse at 10 o'clock in the morning. Because by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, both of you have expended your energy. The kids have probably stressed you out. Chores of the day have stressed you out. You're probably thinking about 200 things at once. Whereas at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're less stressed. You have more energy. You probably just had your first or second cup of coffee. You're in a better mood. So, of course, the conversation is going to go differently if you have a conversation at 10 a.m. versus 5 p.m. What ends up happening is that we have the conversation at 5 p.m. and then we're surprised when our spouse doesn't react or doesn't respond well. When we could have predicted that if we were collecting assessment right before the conversation. If we would have taken a moment to assess, she's probably, in my case, my spouse is a she, she's probably stressed out, she's probably tired, she probably hasn't eaten in the last 4 or 5 hours, and she's probably thinking about dinner and bedtime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you use assessment, you can set up a situation that gives you a more objective chance of success rather than just trusting your gut and thinking that you're right because of a biased worldview.
We spent like a good bit of the conversation talking about other people and how we can pick up if other people are lying, not telling the truth, being deceitful, etc. I think people in general, like I've said, have a hard time with tough conversations. It can come across as being unconfident, maybe shy, a bit nervous, and that can be off-putting to somebody who maybe doesn't know them as well. What tips do you have for somebody to be able to gain more empowerment during a conversation and to appear more confident if there's somebody that has a hard time with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the truth here is a truth that most people don't like to hear, right? All of self-improvement doesn't actually start with improving yourself. You're not actually going to improve yourself very quickly. You can have very fast success, but you cannot have very fast personal improvement because personal improvement is something that oftentimes doesn't happen until after you have seen that something works. It's not like working out. When you go to the gym and you try to bench press, you just can't bench press 225 pounds. I mean, maybe you can bench press 125 pounds, but you have to literally go to the gym day after day, week after week, with a routine. You have to eat right, you have to rest, and eventually you will build up to the place where you can bench press 225 pounds. Self-improvement is the opposite. Self-improvement, you basically have to convince yourself, I'm going to go try to bench press 225 pounds. Even better, I'm going to understand that the reality is that it doesn't matter how much I actually lift. It matters whether or not the other people in the gym believe I am lifting 225 pounds. Even if it's a fake bar with fake weights. If they think I'm lifting 225 pounds, then from their perception, I have lifted that much weight. That's really where self-improvement and professional improvement lies. It doesn't lie in taking 6 months to get better. The value to professional and personal improvement is doing something today that immediately has benefits. So when somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I'm shy around other people, I'm awkward around other people, I'm anxious in conversations, the last thing I try to tell them is, oh, well, what you need to do is 6 months of meditation and 2 years of counseling and read these 7 books and create a journal, because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to take 6 months to get better. They want to get better right now. Well, if you actually want to get better right now, the first thing you have to understand is that it's not about you at all. It's about how other people perceive you, because they're living in a perception. They're living in a world where their perception is their reality, whereas their perspective is something they're not even trying to develop. So if you feel like you're anxious during a conversation, prepare for that conversation and then lie your ass off during the conversation. But instead of lying about the content, lie about how you actually feel. Lie through your behavior. Appear to be confident. Appear to be knowledgeable. Appear to be excited. It takes effort. It takes time. This is where the whole idea of fake it until you make it comes from. Because the reality is that just because you're faking it doesn't mean that the audience knows you're faking it. The other person doesn't know that you're faking it. And one of the big aha moments that the agency gave me was when I realized that I don't have to be the best shooter. I don't have to be the fastest driver. I don't have to be the strongest guy in the room. I just have to get people to think I can shoot well. I just have to get people to think I can drive fast. And if they believe it, it's just as effective as if it is true itself.
Talk about the difference between lying and manipulation. And then if you could go into how to tell if somebody's trying to manipulate you or you're being manipulated.
Yeah, it's another really solid example, another solid point here, right? So I would say that lying and manipulation, they're cousins of each other, right? So when you're trying to manipulate someone, you are partially manipulating the information that you give that person, which means that you are probably being deceitful intentionally in some way, shape, or form with that information. And it is the intentional deception of information that is the definition of lying, right? Intentional deceit, or the intent to deceive. So yes, manipulation and lying do oftentimes go hand in hand. But I think to get to the heart of your question, it's important to understand that if you consider a coin like a quarter or a dime, one side of that coin is manipulation. And manipulation at the agency, we define manipulation as getting people to do what you want them to do because it's in your best interest. So let me say that again. Getting people to do what you want them to do because it's in your best interest. That is manipulation. The flip side of that coin, the opposite side of that quarter or that dime, is motivation. Motivation. And motivation is getting someone to do what you want them to do because it's in their best interest, right? The opposite of manipulation. In manipulation, you're getting them to take a certain action because it benefits you. In motivation, you're getting them to take a specific action because it benefits them. So motivation and manipulation are the two real opposite factors here. And it's important to understand that because the same techniques that you use to manipulate someone, you can also use to motivate them. It's just a matter of asking yourself about the outcome. Is the outcome benefiting you? If so, it's manipulation. Or is the outcome benefiting them? If so, it's motivation. So deceit can be used to both manipulate and motivate. So I don't want anyone to think that lies are inherently bad, right? A big thing that CIA teaches us is that there really is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. There is no black or white. We live in a world of gray. Different situations, different scenarios will require a different set of tools to get a specific outcome. The question is first, what is the outcome that you want? And then the question is, what tools do I want to use to get that outcome? We've all lied to our children to get them to do the right thing. Does that make us bad parents? We've all lied to our spouses or lied to our partners to get them to do something that's good for them. Does that make us liars or cheaters or bad husbands or bad spouses? No. It's just a matter of the tool that we use to get the outcome. Similarly, we have all told the truth to try to get someone to do something that is in their best interest, and they still haven't done it. Just because you tell them the truth doesn't mean that it's going to motivate them to do the right thing. So we need to kind of let go. We need to accept through cognitive dissonance that the idea of right or wrong, good or bad, ethical or unethical, all of that is a subjective, fabricated framework. In reality, it's all about outcomes and tools. And if you're looking for a certain outcome, you have to be willing to take those tools. I don't know that that answered your question, Doug, but I'm hoping it helped.
For sure. And in the context of self-improvement and improving our relationship with other people, if we're trying to get somebody else to do something, I think I've heard you say there's like an acronym. I think it's like RICE. That if people can understand this, they'll understand how to be more convincing be more convincing to somebody else for them to change their behavior, or even for them to change their own behavior. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The acronym RICE is an acronym that we use to talk about, just like we were just discussing the difference between motivation and manipulation. RICE is an acronym that helps you remember the 4 core motivations. Now, of course, any of those 4 core motivations can also be used to manipulate. But the idea is to understand that motivation is the place where we start, because getting people to do what benefits them, getting people to have an outcome that benefits them, makes them that much more predictable, that much more loyal, that much more controllable to what you're trying to achieve for yourself. So the acronym RICE, RICE, stands for rewards, ideology, coercion, and ego. And it means that at the core of every human being, whether they're Chinese or whether they're Brazilian or whether they're American, there are 4 core motivations always at work, but of different intensities. Some people will do things because they want a reward. Maybe that's a monetary reward. Maybe that's a social reward. Maybe they want a pat on the back from mom and dad. Maybe they want words of affirmation from their boyfriend or girlfriend. There's some kind of external reward that they're looking for. So they're willing to do things to get that reward. That's R. I is ideology. Ideology means that people believe that something is true. They have some sort of core value or some sort of core belief system that makes them believe that they're doing something that is ideologically sound. This is the first thing most people think of is faith. People who are Muslim have different ideological drivers than people who are Christian, or people who are Buddhist, or people who are Wiccan, right? They have different sets of ideological beliefs that lead them to take different actions, even though they all believe that the action is in the best interest of themselves or their outcomes. So that's ideology. I'm going to skip C for a second, and I'm going to go to E. E is ego. Mm-hmm. Ego means how you, as an individual, want to be viewed by the world around you. We oftentimes mistake ego with egotistical, where egotistical or egotism means that you want to be seen as powerful or smart or knowledgeable. You want the world to revolve around you. That's egotism. Ego is not that. Ego just means it's how you want the world to perceive you. So as an example, Mother Teresa wanted the world to see her as sacrificial. She wanted the world to see her as someone who actively exercises humility and nonviolence and self-sacrifice. That was Mother Teresa's ego. She had an ego. She was not egotistical, but she did have an ego. Everybody has an ego. Donald Trump has an ego. Mother Teresa has an ego. Gandhi had an ego. The Pope has an ego. Mom and dad have an ego. Nothing wrong with having an ego. It's just if you can understand that there are people who people will take certain actions in order to protect, expand, or solidify their ego, now you understand the E in Rice. Now, I skipped over the letter C because the letter C stands for coercion. Coercion is very different than rewards or ideology or ego because coercion is inherently manipulative, meaning that if you're going to take action on somebody to emphasize their shame or their guilt or put them under physical stress or physical duress because you're threatening them, all of those are forms of coercion. When you coerce somebody, it's the weakest form of motivation, right? You can get people to take action that is in their own best interest by coercing them. You can guilt someone to taking action. You can threaten someone into taking action. A lot of parents threaten their kids before they to eat all their food or else they don't get dessert, right? Like we're all accustomed to coercion, but the problem is coercion, it has a very limited lifespan. It's not as permanent or as powerful as the other three motivators. So that's my long way of answering your question, Doug, that there are 4 core motivators for everyone: reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. If you understand those 4 and you understand the person well enough to know which one of their 4 they are the most susceptible to, you can essentially motivate them to any outcome that you desire for yourself or for them.
What's the most common one that people are most successful what's the most common one that people are most susceptible to?
So it's a great question. The idea of commonality, I think, is relevant only to a culture because different cultures have different commonality. If you're in Asia, ego is the top of the list. If you're in the United States, reward is the top of the list. But I think what's most important to understand is which one is the most effective globally. At a human level, which one is the most effective? And that's ideology. If you can get someone to believe that they're taking an action that benefits or is in line with their ideology, you have a very, very high likelihood of success. So if you want someone to eat their broccoli and you're talking to a Buddhist, if you can tie broccoli to their faith set, you'll be successful. If you're talking to a Texan, if you can tie broccoli to their state, then you're going to be successful. If you're talking to a libertarian, if you can tie broccoli to some aspect of personal liberty, you're going to be successful. But ideology is by far the most effective.
You work with a lot of the most mentally tough people that exist. What are some common themes? Like, what are the best practices of some of these people that they do on a regular basis to make sure that they're maintaining a certain level of self-confidence, certain level of self-esteem, and how they feel about themselves?
The mentally tough people strike a very important balance. It's a dynamic balance. It's one that's always shifting, but it's a balance that they maintain between looking for the best in themselves over the previous day, over the previous week, looking at their episodes of where they put in quality effort, where they did indeed control what they could control, what little successes did they achieve, what little accomplishments did they complete throughout the course of the day, looking for indications of progress. They're very good at cultivating the habit of looking for the best in themselves day by day, and in fact even hour by hour. And they also maintain a little bit of, I guess you could call it, internal criticism. What am I missing? What might I be able to do better? It's a balance of those two factors that everybody has to come to grips with. I will say, however, I think our society has oversold us on the idea of constantly being our harshest critic, consciously telling us, okay, you need to work harder, you need to be tougher on yourself, you need to be more critical of yourself, and that is indeed the process by which you become successful. That's not really very true. There is a time and a place to focus on your errors and your imperfections and your difficulties. And there's a time and a place for you to be your own harshest critic and your own strictest taskmaster. But boy, is there a time and a place to be your own best friend and your own biggest fan. And people got to know when and where to do those two things. If you are in the middle of a test, if you are in the middle of a game, self-criticism does not serve you. That's when you really need to be your own best friend. If you have just suffered a loss, a disappointment, well, in the immediate aftermath of that, you really have to be your own best friend, because that's how you drag yourself up and get back in the arena. And then you got to be a little bit of your harshest critic to push yourself to do the studying, do the practice, do the training that will get you ready for the next one. So it's a constant dynamic balance. I discuss some of the particulars of this in the book towards the end when I advise people on how to do an after-action review of a performance.
It's really enlightening to hear you say that, because I think a lot of people, when they hear people, they think of the military, they think of drill sergeant, they think of just do 10 more, you got to be your best, like work harder, like, and just to hear you say that there needs to be this healthy balance and that we've actually over-indexed like the self-criticism part, I think is going to really hit home with a lot of people. And let's talk about like how to be your best friend, because when I think of my own experience on how I've been my best friend, it's, you know, the way I talk to myself, it's who I spend time with, it's my activities on a day-to-day basis. But what are some of these exercises that you walk some of these cadets or your clients through when they're looking to achieve something that they're fearful of, or when they're under pressure, so that they can remain optimistic before doing so?
Sure. I work with folks to create what I refer to as a mental bank account, a storehouse of thoughts and memories that produce power, that produce energy, that produce enthusiasm. One of the exercises, the aforementioned reflection on effort and success and progress, what I refer to as the daily ESP. That's an important step to take. And you can even go deeper with that. You know, you're an athlete in a workout or in a training session, and you complete a drill of which you've done, say, 10 repetitions, and the coach blows the whistle and sends the team into another drill. In that space between the end of the first drill and the start of the second drill, what's going through your head? What are you choosing to remember about the first drill? 99.9 out of 100 people to whom I ask that question say, well, I either remember the last rep of the drill or I remember the worst rep that I had. And I said, well, think about how that is affecting your confidence. Think about how that choice of memory that you're engaging in affects that running total, that mental bank account. How about disciplining yourself to look for the very best rep and remind yourself and review that little best rep as you move to the start of the second drill? And then you do the second drill, and you do the same thing at the end of the second drill. Momentarily recall your best rep. If you're a student in class, and it's amazing the looks I get on cadets' faces when I say, okay, you are walking out of, say, your required physics class. And that class could have blown your mind. It's a tough class, let's face it. But are you telling yourself, reminding yourself of the one little thing that you got out of that class? The one principle that you remember? The one equation that you solved? The one formula that made sense to you? Are you looking for the best in yourself in that last hour? Even if the rest of the class completely confused you, but what did you get? So I'm counseling people to take that daily reflection, but also to do mini reflections throughout the day. Drill, review, drill, review, drill, review, and that way you build that bank account. That's one really important practice. I mean, another really important practice is to be honest with yourself about the stories that you tell yourself all day long. What do you believe about yourself in terms of your skill in this area, your competence in that area, your knowledge in a given area? We all have opinions, and we all have to come to grips with the fact that those opinions deeply influence the actions that we take. And of course, those actions that we take deeply influence the results that we achieve. So we really got to come to grips with the fact that those results are a vague reflection of the beliefs that we started out with. So how about putting beliefs into your skull that are going to help you get the results that you actually want? Think about what you want as if you got it, even if you don't. I know people say, well, I'm just deluding myself. Well, just about every human achievement begins with a little bit of delusion, you know? Once upon a time, you couldn't ride a bike. You had no evidence that you could do it. You saw other kids do it. Something got you back on the bike. You had this delusional idea that it could be done. I can ride that bike. I'm encouraging people to construct statements to themselves that are phrased in the present tense about skills or abilities that they wish to have, about qualities that they wish to have, and about outcomes that they wish to have.
I was going to say, I know you're really big on affirmations and that you've talked a lot about that in your book, but it's not just the simple affirmations that we see sometimes where it's like, you know, I believe in myself or I'm going to do better. Like there's this in-depth process you walk people through.
Yeah, the idea is to be very, very specific and very precise, okay? My shot hits the upper right corner consistently. My feet move precisely. I am the 2022 NCAA 149-pound national champion. It's first person, present tense, very powerful language, very precise. There's a whole series of criteria to make those kinds of belief statements effective.
So, like, what is it about the way that you teach this in the book where you essentially have people write out, like you said, a more detailed vision of who they want to become? Like why is that work versus just the general affirmations we see a lot of people making?
Because it specifies the outcome that you're after, which makes it easier to take the specific outcomes, to take the specific actions that lead to those outcomes. Oh, I believe in myself, I believe in myself. Well, that's kind of vague. Okay, how about I believe in my ability to execute excellent man-down defense. I believe in my ability to solve thermodynamic equations. It contextualizes things, and so it actually accesses those parts of the brain that are specific to those activities. That's what you want to change, so let's engage those neurons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm so glad you touched on that because you know, a lot of people, when they write like something they're grateful for, they write affirmations, they're so vague and they don't really attach an emotional meaning to it. So I think it's a lot harder to believe that about yourself or even envision yourself getting to that point because there's not really much depth to it. I was talking to somebody the other day and I was telling them that I was interviewing you, and this is somebody that struggles a lot with self-confidence. And one of the things that I said I would ask is, like, how do you encourage somebody to build self-confidence when they are so down on themselves that they don't even have the confidence that they can build confidence within themselves?
Boy, thanks for throwing me a tough curveball there, Doug. I've encountered that at times, and it's a slow, patient process, okay? With someone in that particular condition, I'd work backwards from grandiose expectations to very simple things. You know, what are you confident about? What are some of the things that you do easily, naturally, automatically? Oh, those are the things that you do have some confidence in. Okay. Now, can we take a baby step, an inch from one of those behaviors to something that perhaps has more impact or more consequence in your life? Your academic performance, your relationships, your athletic performance, et cetera, et cetera. So the quick answer to your question is that you move very slowly and you get people to reflect on effort, success, progress in something that's maybe just a little bit challenging as opposed to, well, you know, I really think I should be able to climb Mount Everest, but I've never made it up the big hill in my backyard yet. Okay, we're going to take it slow, pal. But we can do this.
Right. That's a great answer because I think it's so important because so many times when we're feeling super low, we're seeing some headlines, we're seeing things on the internet about, lose 100 pounds or do these big goals. And we're sitting here and we're like, man, like I don't even have the confidence to lose 1 pound or 2 pounds. Like, how am I going to get to 100? And we focus on that and we end up just quitting before we started. But we have to change our narrative and the perspective, like you said, and saying, okay, like let's just see how slow or what we can get to first. What is a small, smart, achievable, maintainable goal that we can go after first and then just keep like knocking those down. One of the other things I think people struggle with when it comes to self-confidence, which you talk about, is like the ability to remain optimistic and confident, like start to finish with something. Where you see this a lot, I'm a trainer, I see this a lot in the fitness industry where everybody's starting their weight loss journey in January, right? And then things get hard. They realize it's not as easy as they thought it was going to be. The gyms are crowded. Maybe, their friends have fallen off and the scale stops moving or they get tired or whatever. And they're like, you know what? I'm not feeling good about my routine anymore. I'm just going to quit. So how do you get somebody to remain confident during a journey like that when they hit obstacles, when they hit these unexpected roadblocks?
I would be counseling people at the very start of said journey. Okay, hey, let's get something straight. It will not be a linear progression. You will not achieve steady progress day in, day out, week in, week out. It's going to be crooked. You will achieve a little success, then you will be on a plateau for a while. And then you will achieve some more success, and then you'll be on a plateau again. So please don't think of it as this straight line trending upward. No, it's going to trend upward a little bit at the start because you're doing some things different. But at some point, the things that you're doing differently are going to meet some resistance and you're going to plateau. It's going to seem like you're doing the same amount of work, but getting far less in terms of payback or results. But here's the deal. It's during those plateaus that your nervous system and your body is actually undergoing a whole bunch of changes. But those changes have to reach a certain critical mass, a certain critical level before bang, the weight drops off, or bang, now I can bench press another 15 pounds where I was plateaued before. The adjustments that your body goes through as you continue with a system of training are intermittent and require a heck of a lot of patience. You've got to tell yourself, I'm on a plateau, but things are still changing. I'm okay with the plateau because I know it's leading me to something. It's having the patience with those plateaus that determines so much of our success and so much of our failure. And just like you point out, Doug, we live in such a media-rich world. We're constantly being bombarded with all these stories of people who are doing fantastic things. And when we hit our own plateaus, we compare ourselves to those other people. We get this momentarily, what's the matter with me? There's nothing the matter with you. You're doing what you need to do. Compliment yourself on your effort. Hang in there. You will see an improvement. It's just the way the nervous system in the animal is wired.
And self-talk is super important when it comes to all things confidence, when it comes to achieving goals, when it comes to really like just life. Because if you tell yourself that you're not going to achieve something, then you probably won't, right? If you continue to tell yourself that you're a bad person, you're probably going to start to behave in certain ways because you already have counted yourself as somebody who's not a good person, and you'll start to reflect that. I want to talk about pressure because maybe there's a lot of people that are listening to this that maybe they're not prepping for a wrestling match, or they're not, going, overseas or to win a Super Bowl. They're just trying to navigate life. And sometimes they feel pressure at work. They feel pressure in relationships. They feel financial pressure. Like, how do you coach some of these people that maybe would be relevant for anybody on how to calm their nervous system when they feel pressure, so that they can kind of remain focused and not get sidetracked, distracted, and they can continue on the task they're looking to achieve?
I explore a little bit of the roots of that pressure, okay? Where does this pressure come from? What signals or what messages are telling you that you should be a certain way? What have you learned about success or achievement that has told you you should be a certain way, you should be doing certain things, and in reality at the moment that you're not? Okay? I have dozens and dozens and dozens of case studies from people who had this idea that they should be a certain way or they should not be a certain way, and the message comes from somebody that they met a long time ago who may have been an authority figure, may not have been an authority figure, but for some reason, that person's voice is still with them. I encourage people to really explore, who told you that? What were the circumstances under which you learned that? Was the person who told you that somebody who was really an expert in his or her field? Was the person who told you that really happy with his or her life? Is that person the person that you want to become? And a lot of times that exploration ends up with, wow, I never thought about it that way. That makes me feel a whole lot better, Doc. All right? So I think we can take a lot of pressure off ourselves by coming to grips with the fact that maybe we're putting it on ourselves for all the wrong reasons, and we don't have to do that. If we're talking about that nervous, somewhat agitated, somewhat uncomfortable feeling that we might have before taking a test, before performing a recital, or before we play a game, before we participate in a job interview, we really have to understand that it's in our best interests that our body undergoes a little bit of physiological arousal at that moment, okay? Your unconscious mind is going to send messages to your adrenal glands and other parts of your body, and that message is, hey, we're about to do something that matters. We're about to do something that actually we care about a little bit. So come on, give us some juice, give us some fuel, and your adrenal glands respond, and they will make your heart beat faster and get more blood to your muscles, and they'll dilate your pupils, and you'll see more. And then the side effects of that is, unfortunately, that the 100 million neurons in your stomach lining get activated too, and they start flipping around. And so you got to expect those signals of arousal to occur, and when they do occur, rather than say, oh, geez, I'm uncomfortable, I don't like this, you got to learn to say, this is my body turning on, getting me ready for a challenge. Thanks, body. I appreciate what you do. Now I got more energy. Now let's see how good I can be.
Yeah, it's so true. Like once you can understand and navigate your body's systems and where a lot of this tension and pressure comes from, and specifically maybe who said something to you when you were younger, or even understanding like the physiology of how your body responds to stress and that it's all normal, I think people are able to get a better grip on it, because once people have this awareness on like what it is that they're experiencing and why, then they feel confident, like, oh, like this kind of makes sense, like now I can take some action. And one of the things that I've been told when it comes to like life in general, and this isn't my quote or my idea, it was somebody had mentioned this to me, is that like the beauty of life is really being able to remain like even keel during the hard times and during the bad times, like not getting underconfident when things aren't going well, not getting overconfident when things are going good. So how do you like coach people? Let's say they win a game, let's say they win a wrestling match, let's say they win an award. How do you get them to kind of remain humble and not remain so overconfident that they forget to do the daily things that help get them to that place in the first place?
The Japanese expression is translated as, after victory, tighten your chin straps. You've just won a match. You've just won a game. You've just aced a test. Okay. Let yourself feel good about it. You deserved it. But there has to be a reflection on, what did I do right? What do I need to continue doing right in terms of my preparation? And again, it's that balance of looking for the best in yourself and being realistic and being both your best friend on one hand and your harshest critic on the other hand. The easy thing to do after a victory is to sort of sit back and be a little bit complacent. Okay, now I got it all figured out. Okay? I encourage people after a victory to actually be a little tougher on oneself than they are after a loss, simply to counteract that simple human tendency to sit back and take it easy when you have experienced some success. I'm not saying ignore the success. Absolutely. Enjoy it. Learn from it. But then be very careful. Now what does this tell me? Now what have I learned from it? Now what do I have to do to ensure the next one? You put it in your question, perhaps inadvertently, Doug. How did I get here? I need to continue doing what I have been doing that got me to this victory in the first place. You know, I was talking to one young cadet last week who was going to face a very tough competition in the near future, you know, and what we concluded was his best chance of success in a very challenging situation against some very quality competition was to keep doing all the things that had gotten him success so far in this particular campaign. And we detailed those out, 5, 6 key behaviors. Those are your best chance. Stay with that. That got you this far. Keep dancing with that person that you came to the dance with.
It's so important to just stick to the fundamentals and the basics like throughout life, and just kind of just remember like what continues to work when you achieve things, and just stay the course. And I think it's healthy, like you said, to celebrate when something goes well in your life, but also it's even more important to take some time after you celebrate to go back and say, okay, like, why did this work? And let's continue to do the things that help this work. Like, as we kind of bring our conversation on confidence to a close, I want to talk about some of the misconceptions with confidence, because I think confidence gets misconceived with and sometimes mixed up with being arrogant or just having an inflated ego, and we all know that's not really what the case is. So talk about some of the common myths when it comes to confidence and like what confidence actually is.
Well, you hit on one of the most common misconceptions, is that confidence equals outspoken arrogance. And that's really not the case. Confidence is what you feel on the inside of yourself. Arrogance and bravado is what comes out of your mouth. And for every loud, outspoken, extroverted person that especially the sports media loves to focus on, you know, the Conor McGregors of the world, for every person like that who is an naturally outspoken, extroverted individual, there are 10 times as many quiet, introverted people who aren't inclined to talk about themselves, but they feel just as powerful on the inside as Conor McGregor does. Serena Williams, the Manning brothers. The list goes on and on and on. So any of your listeners who see themselves as a sort of quiet, polite, modest, respectful person, don't feel that you're going to compromise any of that by doing the kind of internal work that will raise your internal opinion of yourself and raise your belief in yourself. Another common misconception is that confidence is this all-encompassing quality, and once you have it, you'll have it everywhere. No, 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 no. Confidence is very situation specific, you know? Even in the gym, my sense of certainty about the deadlift is different than my sense of certainty about pull-ups, okay? I got to work on that. You know, even, you know, your skill set as a basketball player. Oh, man, I know I dribble well, but boy, I'm not much of a defensive player. Well, you got to work on your confidence as a defensive player. So that idea that confidence is this all-encompassing thing is just a misconception that we have to throw away. And thirdly, another huge misconception is that confidence is some sort of constant in your life. You're born with a certain amount and it remains forever. No, no, no. Confidence is learned. Confidence is very situation specific, and confidence gets eroded by the imperfect and difficult world that we're all inhabiting. So it's not like you're going to achieve it and keep it forever. No, you're going to achieve some of it, and then you're going to have to protect it, and it's going to take a knock here and there, and you have to build it back up. And it's a constant, as one cadet put it, it's a constant war of attrition. There's no single decisive victory in terms of confidence and mental toughness. It's a long-term, pretty constant war of attrition where you are constantly addressing and protecting yourselves against the things that can drag it down.
You said that so elegantly, and I'm so glad that like we talked about these misconceptions because they're all true. And I think at the end of the day, like confidence is a constant game of building it and working on it on a everyday basis and focusing on how far you've come and addressing what you need to work on and being mindful of when you have achieved something well and what work to go into that. So I guess my very last question is like if somebody had like 30 seconds with you and they were they met you at a Starbucks, they ran into you at West Point and they were like, Doc Z, I'm just struggling to build confidence right now. I feel unconfident in my life. I feel unconfident with my job. Like, what are like 2 or 3 quick tips you would give them?
Tip number 1, monitor the things that you say about yourself, okay? And make a decision. Do I feel more energetic and more optimistic when I say those things to myself? Second thing I'd say, okay, well, you're a human being on this planet and you've lived a certain number of years, and you would not have done so had you not experienced some kind of success, some kind of progress over the course of your life. Take a look at your life. You did some things. Take a close look at your life. Be willing to look for the moments of success and satisfaction. That's the opening of your mental bank account right there. Be willing to look for the best in yourself starting right now. Look back to your past, and then from this moment forward, just try to make a little notation day by day of something that you got right. Something that you got right. And be willing to remind yourself of that day in and day out. I hope I have more than 30 seconds to work with somebody.
I want to dive into intuition because that's a big buzzword now. It's like trust your intuition, trust your gut, think intuitively. From a neuroscience perspective, or give an overview as in depth as you possibly can on what the science of intuition actually is.
So, I'll start with an example. I think we all know what it feels like to have a gut feeling. Whether we follow it or not, that is up to us. My friend Kushal was in one of the Twin Towers during 9/11, and the guards were saying, stay in the building. And he had this gut feeling to run, and he saved his life literally by a hair. He got out of that building. And I think we've all experienced gut feelings. Sometimes we don't follow them and it's no big deal. And sometimes it was like, oops, I kind of knew I shouldn't have gotten married to that person. That's a lot bigger deal. And so from a scientific perspective, you can think of it in multiple ways. One, you can think of it as, we were just talking about awareness, hyper awareness. And that's how the military trains it. The Marine Corps uses a program called Combat Hunter Training. And it's really about focusing your attention outward and really noticing where things deviate from the norm. So that's sort of a hyper external awareness. And again, you do have to be calm. You have to have some kind of internal calmness that you're actually paying attention, because when you're in high fight or flight or stress, your attention becomes really narrow and you see less things. Like you literally visually see less things when you're in a stressed mode. And research shows that when you do practices like meditation, which by the way, the military is adopting more and more, you're able to visually see more things with your eyes, which is really fascinating. I had some colleagues who ran a study, the attentional blink task. So if I were to show you a bunch of pictures in a row of, say, hats, and I embed 2 pictures of cats and I say, like, Doug, how many pictures of cats did you see? Chances are you would say 1. It's called the attentional blink. Like, we all do it. And yet what these researchers found is that when you train people in meditation, they end up seeing both pictures of cats. So it doesn't escape their awareness. So anyway, you can think of intuition as that external hyper attentiveness. So there's many different forms of intuition. There's that, but then there's also a physiological awareness. So have you ever been around someone where you don't feel good around them? Like you just have a bad feeling, but you can't explain it with your mind, right?
Right.
It's just this feeling. So what's going on here? Physiologically, your body is registering something, but your mind hasn't caught on yet because our intellect's actually pretty slow. For example, if I were angry right now and I were pretending I'm not angry, I'm like, Doug, I'm not angry. I'm just fine. I'm smiling and all that, but I'm angry on the inside. Your heart rate would increase. Intellectually, you wouldn't know why because you'd be like, everything seems fine. But your physiology has already registered what's happening and set off a red flag, an alarm bell. And the reason for that is because we register, it's an instinct. So you can also think of intuition, therefore, as this sort of physiological instinct. And I'll explain why it's an instinct, because animals have the same reaction. A horse, if used in therapy, so sometimes therapists use a horse and with a patient, but if the patient comes up and is like pretending not to be scared of that horse, the horse automatically becomes very anxious and is just moving all over the place. And the reason is that they're animals of prey. They've registered the inauthenticity. Even though they don't understand our human language, they've registered the inauthenticity. And if the patient is like, I'm not scared, I'm totally fine, the horse calms down. This is very common. What's going on here? We register inauthenticity as threat. So in any case, that's just another way, like physiologically, we're tuning into something that our intellect is not comprehended yet. So there's that. And then you can also think of intuition as this sort of subconscious processing in the background. Like there's your brain is making some calculations. There's a cognitive processing that's happening, but that's subconscious. And then you're receiving a thought. For example, sometimes, have you ever noticed that you could be working on a problem and you're trying to figure it out and you can't figure it out and suddenly it just pops in your head when you're least thinking about it? Yeah. So that's another way of thinking about it. So there's a range of ways that we can think about it from a scientific perspective. And then, some people are better at it than others. We also see scientifically that some people seem to be more attuned to it. But it's certainly something that you can train. And I'll get more into that.
So what's the difference between intuition and like fear? Because some of the stuff you just mentioned are also signs of somebody who's scared as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think that intuition is a form of cognition that was developed as an instinctual way to help guide us in life and keep us safe, right? That's why it's probably such a rapid form of cognition, because it's meant to save our life. If Kushal were sitting there deliberating, should I listen to this guard or should I not? By that time, it's too late. But what's really important here too, because you bring this up, is that you don't want to mistake your fear for intuition, right? If you're someone who's just really scared of speaking in public, and you're like, oh, I have this intuition I shouldn't go speak in public. Well, maybe it's just your fear. It's not your intuition. And actually, when you're stuck in a big emotion, that's not a good time for you to tap into your intuition, because you're probably not tapping into it. You're tapping into your fear. And actually, what research shows is that we're most likely to tap into our aha moments of insight. We were just talking about you tap into them in a moment when you're not thinking about it. When is it that you come up with your best ideas? What kind of activities?
I mean, you're kind of not thinking about it. You're just moving around. If I'm doing a slow jog or a walk and I'm like listening to music or a podcast, not really thinking about what I'm doing, something will just randomly pop up and I'll have to like voice note it into my notes to make sure that I remember it when I get back.
Right? Exactly. So that's when your brain is in alpha wave mode. So alpha wave is when you're not fully concentrated and you're not so relaxed you're about to pass out. It's that in-between space. And it's this magical place. You could think of it as a meditative state of mind. But Albert Einstein, he knew to take advantage of this. So he would go and play music, play Mozart, and that puts you in alpha wave frequency in your brain. And as a consequence, that's when he would find his best insights or intuitions. In fact, I have to share with you a quote by him, because he talked about intuition a lot. And I'm going to share some quotes with you, because of all people, he knew, I believe in intuition and inspiration. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research. And then he says, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift, which is really interesting when you think about it with this perspective that we get our best ideas when our brain is in alpha wave mode. But look at our society. We are functioning always in this highly focused mode. And when you're looking at your technology all day, you're constantly focused. And as you do that, you're robbing yourself from the ability to be in alpha wave mode and from the ability to get your greatest, most innovative insights, which you get when you're taking time just walking and listening to music. That's why they come then. So then you could think of that also as that subconscious processing. You could think of it that way, or you could think of it as being more receptive in some manner. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. What really matters is that you get the insights. And, like kids, they are so creative and innovative. And yet they could build castles out of cardboard. I mean, they're constantly creating and innovating, and until you put them on a screen, and then it just all stops, right? So we all have the same creative genius as children have, and we have the same, and intuition is something that Einstein, he talks about intuition and imagination together because they're very much connected. You could think of it as, oh, I'm creating something new, or I just incited something new. I just intuited something new. It's this very closely linked process.
So to separate fear and like safety from intuition, somebody has to be like emotionally stable and regulated, right? I mean, you talked about a breathwork practice earlier. Anything you would add to that, or something where somebody could, in the heat of the moment, if they're like, I need to make a decision like right now or in the next 10 minutes, anything that they could do so that they could kind of bring themselves back to a neutral state emotionally and ensure that they're able to connect with their intuition the right way?
Yeah. I mean, having researched this for quite a while and worked with the military on this, the fastest, most efficient way for you to get yourself back down from a stressful moment, to get from a 10 to a 2 or a 1, is through breathing. I mean, that's going to be the fastest, most rapid. And what I recommend is, breathe in for, say, a count of 4, but breathe out for a count of 8, or double as much. And do that for 5 minutes. You're going to get your heart rate way down. The other thing you can do is also just lie down on the floor, like just lie down on your back and stop moving, and just take the deeper breaths. The sooner you come back to baseline, the more you can get in touch with your gut. Otherwise, you are stuck in emotion. That's not a really great place to take a big decision. Although sometimes we don't have a choice, and then you have to just go with it. But see if you can even just take 30 seconds to just calm down your fears.
We were talking about this like before we recorded, and I wanted to make sure I touched on this. A lot of people who listen to the podcast, they listen to it because they're either have gone through various types of adversity, or they're going through adversity now, or they want to learn how they can navigate adversity better. I think when people are trying to make different decisions in their life and learning to trust their gut better, a lot of times their life could be in chaos and they're not even aware of it, right? That like the way they're behaving, or their habits, or the people they're spending time with, or the way they talk to themselves, they have just no awareness around anything at all. I think it's hard for people to trust themselves if their life is in chaos at the moment, but they want to make better decisions. I mean, maybe there isn't a silver bullet answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how can somebody bridge that gap.
Thanks for asking that super real question. No matter how educated or trained someone is, chances are they have as much formal education about how to handle difficult moments and difficult emotions as a 5-year-old, which means none. Like, we don't get formal training. And our society offers us so many things so that we don't have to feel. Most people, when they're feeling bad and things are chaotic, they're going to try to numb themselves out, suppress the emotion, which research shows actually, again, talk about disconnecting yourself from yourself, right? That's like the first thing, but also research shows that it worsens the emotion, makes it worse, disconnects you from other people, actually wears and tears on your body. What it also does is then people turn to, let me see what I can find to make myself feel better. Whether it's alcohol or weed or shopping or gambling or porn or overworking, or, I mean, it could look great. Like I go to the gym 3 times a day, like, whatever it is that we have this sense, I should be able to come back to homeostasis in some way. I should be able to come back to balance. But then the world is offering this plethora of stuff that we could be doing to numb ourselves and to intoxicate ourselves and to mask things. Most people can relate to this. Like, oh yeah, I stress eat. Oh yeah, like I watch like shows on repeat until, whatever it is, to not feel. And I think one of the most sovereign things you can learn to do is freaking feel it, even if it's hard. And sometimes I've gotten feedback on social media where people have just told me to like F off when I've shared this, But if you look at like a child, They feel their emotions 100%. And how long is a child angry for? Like 2 minutes? How long can an adult be angry for?
Years sometimes, right?
Right? The rest of their life. So they're both disconnected from themselves, sitting in this anger, which is disconnecting them from others. Absolutely. So your point is so well taken. When we're disconnected from ourselves, how can we listen to our intuition? And that's coming back to this ability to feel. And that sucks. But if you allow yourself to experience the emotion as energy, because emotion is energy in motion, let it move through your system. If you're enraged, freaking go and like hit a pillow or whatever you need to do. Don't put it on other people, obviously, but like feel it, even if it hurts so much, because on the other side of that is your connection with yourself and is your healing from that. That feeling is going to move, and these are the hard things. And our society gives us a million temptations. So as we're to be disconnected from ourselves and not in touch, but that's taking away our sovereign right to just be who we are and in touch with our intuition, in touch with our potential, in touch with how we want to show up in our life, in touch with our ability to be as strong as powerful as we can be, despite being in chaos. Because otherwise we're maiming ourselves while already being in a difficult situation, which is really sad. And it's not what we want.
What do you say to somebody who maybe doesn't feel completely disconnected from themselves, but over the last few years has thought they trusted their gut, thought they made the right decision, and looking back in hindsight and like, oh, I just can't get anything right. I make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. What do you say to that person so that they can make the shift of thinking that every decision they're going to make moving forward is going to be wrong, to leaving the past in the past and just figuring out a way to make a better decision based on what their gut is actually telling them?
I mean, I think it's a good idea to think of the past as fate and the future as free will, But I mean, the thing with the past is that we don't know whether something else would have been even worse. We have no idea. We have 20/20 hindsight, right? Like we don't know. But whatever's for sure is that in the past, we were always more immature than we are now. We always knew less and but what we can do now is make sure, how am I living my life? Am I living my life in a courageous, sovereign way where I am feeling what I'm feeling, where I'm taking time to listen to myself, where I'm connecting to myself as opposed to being disconnected from myself, which is what society is teaching me to do, what consumption culture is teaching me to do, what the self-loathing programs that have been running in our societies and families forever have been teaching us to do. And instead, with courage and awareness, it does take courage, because when you're aware, it's hard. And it's hard. But what's harder? Living in a disconnected way from yourself, And that's why I wrote my book, because I saw that and I was like, this is not, we're meant to be living at a much higher potential where we're connected to ourselves. And then you're going to be able to trust your intuition more. And of course, you'll notice that your greatest intuitions, see when they come to you when you're walking and listening to music, your mind is quiet and you're connecting to yourself. It's not complicated, right? You're just out walking. And you'll find that like going out in nature is another example. What happens when we go out and take a walk in nature? You go back to alpha wave mode and you connect with yourself, assuming you're not also playing on your phone or doing whatever else, right? As soon as you connect with yourself, the solutions come.
The main way to tell if something is off, like you mentioned, being around somebody, you just get that feeling, which we've all had, where you're like, just something feels off right now. The main way is to feel it physiologically, but only if you have the self-awareness to separate whether or not it's like a trigger from your past or it's like a fear of something in the moment, and then moving through that and then making a decision. Tell me if I've understood that correctly. And then other than that, is there any other way other than the body to tell if something's off?
Another thing with the body is that if that instinct is so freaking strong that you just can't help it, like my friend Kushal running out of the building, or as a parents will often feel this, they're just like, they just run and grab that kid, and there's a knowledge. When it's really a life or death situation, you're not even going to have a moment to think about it because it's going to happen through your body. The other way, so I interviewed Chip Nylon, who is an officer in the Marine Corps, on the combat hunter training. And what he was saying is that training is about awareness on the outside as opposed to on the inside. And he would say, we'd walk through these Afghani towns, and we're not from Afghanistan. Like we don't know how to interpret the surroundings, they would bring along some Afghani soldiers with them, and they would notice, oh, do the Afghani soldiers, are they relaxed? Are they smoking? Are they, just chilling out? Or do they look anxious? But they would also notice in the environment, oh, this playground that's always busy is suddenly empty. Like, what's going on there? Noticing. And again, in our time when we are constantly on our phones and so forth, we're being trained out of noticing anything in our environment. I always joke as a woman, I grew up in a big city where I get harassed a lot just because it was a big city. It's in Europe, and that was very, very common. And I noticed, wow, since people had cell phones, because that when I was younger, they didn't. When I was a teenager, there were no cell phones. It's like, oh, there's less harassment because people aren't even noticing anyone around them, But the point being is that, again, if we're constantly distracting ourselves, we're not going to notice anything that shifts from the norm. But that's another way. Finally, like I said, the subconscious processing, that alpha wave mode, making time for that. You can try this as well. I've done this often where I'm dealing with a problem and I'll just sit down and meditate, and I have the problem in my mind, but then I'm just not going to think about it anymore. I just meditate. And at the end of the meditation, I have a solution coming in my mind, or at some point in it, because you're just letting that subconscious come up. Or, you could think of it in a different way, like you're being receptive, whatever way you want to think about it.
But you said in tandem with that, it's also important for people to practice the self-awareness around their past and their patterns so that they can tell the difference if it's something's actually off, or if it's just like a trigger from their past coming up that has nothing to really do with the current situation, has everything to do with something that happened a few years ago or a few months ago or whatever, right?
It's so true. Whether that's fear or shame, or whatever it is, that's a trigger. That has to do with us.
My next question gets into, like, people always want to know, like, where they stand on certain things. Like, how do I know if I need to improve? How does somebody actually know that they have a good gut instinct?
Often encourage people to just take a moment to maybe sit and journal about this and just consider, okay, when have I had really strong gut feelings and what have they led me to? I remember at 17 having a really strong gut feeling about where I wanted to go to college. I just knew I had to go there, and I got in there, and it wasn't a very happy experience there, but it majorly shaped my life and influences it to this day. And I realized I've had several things happen where I realized I had to be there, because I ended up coming back and teaching there again. The way that things worked out, it just felt like, okay, my gut feeling was right. I wasn't happy there, but it was still right. You know what I mean? So sometimes, even if your gut feeling wasn't the thing that made you happiest, it may still have led you somewhere that you really needed to learn something from. But I would say, as you move forward, there's a couple things. You can test your intuition on small things, and see if you do things like a meditation practice, whether it gets a little sharper. One meditation may not do it, but let's say you decide to meditate using an app. Like I use an app called Sattva. Like I use it every day, twice a day, and see what happens after a month when you use your intuition on small things that are not so significant, so you don't feel like you're taking a big risk. And actually, there's one of my colleagues, Scott Barry Kaufman, who also has a podcast. His dissertation looked at, whether certain people are better at detecting sort of implicit patterns, or you could think of as this sort of ability to perceive things that others may not see because they're subliminal or something like that. And he found that people who are better at that tend to be people who are more abstract thinkers, who are focused more on sort of patterns rather than facts, data, and their five senses, right? They're not just always like the here, the now, my body, and facts, but they also have this creative, you could think of it more like a more artistic way of going about life. They tend to have a better intuition to begin with. Also, people who learn languages fairly easily. And then finally, people who have this personality trait called openness to experience, which is a personality trait that reflects receptivity to new ideas and experiences, creativity, just this idea of being just really open. So those are some personality traits that are related to it. But again, it's still something you can train as long as you are doing those things to connect to yourself, whether through meditation or through any of the kind of practices we talked about earlier.
So my follow-up question to that is, how do you convince somebody who's like more of a logical thinker, who's more of like a type A person, to like tap into this?
Well, first of all, 85% of CEOs report using their intuition at some point. She has a story of Lynn Tilton, who graduated from Yale as a single mom and it was the 80s, and she went to Wall Street to work on Wall Street, where she was sexually harassed every day by both clients and colleagues, but had to work to support her child. And then in her 30s was kind of like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm retiring now. I've made enough money. And she retired to Florida with her daughter. And then she received an intuition that came to her in the form of a dream. And it was her deceased father. He had deceased when she was a high school student. And she had firsthand experienced what it's like when the primary provider is gone. She perceived him through this sort of intuition in her dream, saying, this is not what I had in mind for you. And so she decided she needed to do something about her life, something different, and contribute in some way. And she decided to do everything she could to stop families from losing a main provider. So she would go around and buy companies that had been given up for dead. All the consulting companies had given up on them, and she bought them and she turned them around. So one of her nicknames is the turnaround queen. She became the owner of the largest woman-owned business in America, Patriarch Partners, and has saved 700,000 jobs because she used her intuition. Now, I interviewed her for my book Sovereign, and when she talked about intuition, she said that she absolutely goes from her intuition, but that intuition without intellect is like buying a plane without any propulsion. So the idea, the insight comes from intuition, but then you use your logic and your reason to make it happen, right? To work it out. I'll also share data by my colleague Joe Michaels, a neuroscientist, who found that in decision making, you're going to make a much better decision using your intuition if the decision is complex. So like if you have an easy decision to make, like whatever, my phone's broken, I need a new one. Okay, that's not a complicated decision. But hey, I need to move to another city for this new job. Should I do it? Should I not? There's a lot of things that play, family, etc., that I need to consider. That's a complicated decision. And so that's where going with your gut, when there's a lot of data to sort through, he shows is you're going to make a better decision. And when I talked to Joe and I say, okay, so do you use your intuition making decisions? He said, I always consult the gut feeling, because he talks about intuition as that gut feeling, the feeling, more of an emotional space. I think that's wise. I think both Lynn and Joe talk about that. They use both. Of course, we should use both, right? So Joe always makes sure to consult it, but Lynn, definitely her intuitions come from her gut. You know, that's what I would recommend.
Have you seen any like misconceptions online about intuition or trusting your gut that you think people should pay attention to?
I think that it's often portrayed as this sort of magical thinking, this sort of woo-woo, out there thing. And I think it's easy to dismiss, and I think it has been very much dismissed in our society, favoring reason, intellect, rationality, which are things that are trained into us in school and are extremely useful tools. But going back to what Einstein says, where he says the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant. We honor the rational mind, and we've forgotten the gift, right? So we have both. We're designed to have both. We're wired to have both. And it's to help save our life, to help give us direction, to help us process information we can only process through our body or in our subconscious mind. It's a form of cognition. And, you know, any neuroscientist you talk to will tell you, we don't know a lot about the brain. You know, we talk about what we do know, but there's so much that we don't know. And just because it's a form of cognition that hasn't been studied in great detail yet, doesn't mean it's not there. And we know from preliminary data that it is there. And the military's been studying it for decades, and we've all used it in our lives. And it's something that that more and more research is happening to look into. So, you know, one of the misconceptions that I just talked about is that everything needs to be reasoned. But another reason that we don't trust intuition is that we're trained to rely on outside sources of information. We're taught we want information, we need to learn something. It comes from outside of us. And we learn that in our education. And for the most part, it's true. You know, you can't really build a car unless you have learned some engineering from somewhere, right? But it trains us so much so that we get out of touch with our internal cues. And there's a specific part of the brain that is focused on paying attention on the inside. It's called interoception. It includes the insula and other parts of the brain. So, but most of the time we're paying attention on the outside. We're watching, listening, tasting, hearing, smelling, touching. We're constantly, you know, looking at our devices and our people around us. But there's a part of our brain that's just for paying attention on the inside. And if anything, we override it. Like, oh, I'm tired, but I'm going to watch another show. Or I'm full, but I'm going to eat another piece of that cookie or whatever, right? And so we dismiss and maybe don't even realize the cues that are there. So that's the other thing, is that because we're so trained on believing that everything must come to us from the outside, and yet there are these internal cues that perhaps only our physiology or our subconscious mind can come up with and can realize.
I'm glad you touched on the spiritual, like woo woo component of it, because like obviously like a lot of people, they find peace and they find gratitude and they find just comfort in the woo woo like spirituality world. But I think it can also, if somebody's not maybe so aligned with that, the word intuition could be such a turnoff to them because they're like, oh, is that just something that's part of that, space and that space only? So I'm glad you touched on like the science of it, and then also how that can kind of be a misconception that it's only this quote unquote like woo woo spiritual thing. You talked about that somebody who's logical shouldn't necessarily trust their gut like in the moment when making a decision, that you should like honor it, but then go to the data, go to like reason before executing the decision. Could you walk the audience through maybe some specific examples on when somebody should or shouldn't trust their gut?
I think don't trust your gut when you're in a highly emotional space and you're not feeling balanced and grounded and centered. When your mind is racing, that's another time. There's just, and one very short exercise I like to do with people is just close your eyes. Notice there's a lot of thoughts popping in and out of your mind. What's the level of traffic? Is it a highway, a country road, or somewhere in between? Your intuition is going to come when you're in a country road, not a highway. So if you've got a highway, if you're just bombarded with thoughts, and then you're not going to hear any internal messages coming your way. When you're really exhausted and burnt out, those are not times when we're really going to be able to tap in accurately. And that's another reason too. And again, this going back to our first thing we talked about, the whole like sort of self-loathing patterns and the addictive patterns we can get into because we don't want to feel our emotions. All those are actually self-destructive habits that don't allow us to be in touch with ourselves or to show up at our best. So the more things you can do to take care of yourself, whether it's the basics of sleep and proper nutrition and exercise, but also meditation and time spent away from stimulation, time spent in alpha wave mode, time spent relaxing and meditating and spending time in nature, or just even unplugging, if you were just to take a half a day and clean your house and not have any stimulation on and everything off, you're probably also going to get some insights simply because you're giving your mind a break.
Like, what are some ways people can get better at making decisions like in the moment using their intuition?
Well, train yourself to listen inwardly when you're not in a moment where you need to make a decision, right? So when you're doing those meditation practices or contemplation practices, whatever you're doing, your Tai Chi or you're walking in nature or whatever, whenever you're doing your activity of choice that puts you in this relaxed frame of mind, you are training your mind for those moments when you're going to need to listen inwardly. But if you never do those things, then you're not, you go to the gym to train your muscles so you can be strong. When, hey, all of a sudden I need to, I don't know, lift this box that fell on a person. Now I can actually help them because I'm strong enough to, right? You're physically able. But same with this. If you want to learn to tap into your gut feeling, your instinct, your intuition, you're going to need to train yourself, especially because we live in a world that's training us to only look outside for information, look outside for entertainment, and constantly barraging us with stimulation. So it's such a radical act to do the opposite, and yet you're training yourself just like you're training yourself at the gym. You're training yourself for awareness from the outside. Like I said earlier, you're going to see more things. You're training yourself for self-awareness. You're going to pick up your internal cues. You're training your mind also for greater calm and stability in those crazy moments. It's really, you're building resilience on so many levels, including being able to tap into your intuition.
And so diving deeper into the training aspect of it, you've talked about the importance of meditation, and being in silence and kind of unplugging to better understand your thoughts, patterns, self-awareness. Is there any kinds of exercises you would recommend people do on like a daily basis or even like a weekly basis where they could actually just work on like their thoughts and decisions and like practicing like connecting to their intuition and making like the right decisions? Is there a practice you would recommend to somebody who is listening to this and they're like kind of understanding what you're saying, but there's somebody that like wants to get the reps in?
Going back to that one exercise, I want you to just go back in your life, write down all the moments you can remember having a strong gut feeling, and just see what happened when you either followed it or didn't follow it. And just try to also become aware of, oh yeah, I think we can all remember. Like, Doug, can you remember a time you had a gut feeling?
Of course, yeah. And I never trust it. I'm always like, I always like look, and I think, I don't know if this is common, but for me, I've definitely trusted my gut before, but I think a lot of times I've only known that my gut was right by looking back. Is that common for people?
Yeah, and you never know when your gut is going to be right. There's no way of knowing. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're not tapped into your gut. You can't know for sure, but you always kind of knew when you had a strong feeling you should do something. Like I did about the college I needed to go to, even though it was miserable there, but it ended up being the right place. And sometimes we do choose. Our gut does tell us, okay, go down that dark alley because you got something to learn there, you know? But regardless, there's never a way of knowing for sure, right? But you do remember what it felt like to have that gut feeling.
Right.
So one thing I would encourage anyone who wants to just dive deeper is, one, go ahead and write down all the feelings, all the times you remember having a gut feeling like this is it, this is the one, this is the thing, this is whatever, right? Or don't do this, or do this, or whatever it is. How did it feel? What was it? Like, just recall, because you've been through this. Okay. And then the second thing is, how am I going to tap myself more into this? And like I said, there's the whole make room in your life for activities in which you are not actively focusing outward and doing something, but you're in that alpha wave mode. You can do this through music, certain music, like Mozart, for example, triggers alpha wave activity in the brain, but Beethoven does not, which is really interesting. And you know best what will put you in that space. Everybody has their own preferences. Or creativity, especially if you're someone who's just all logic and rationality, it's like, make some time to freaking learn the guitar or something. Like, do something creative, like doodle or whatever. Something that pulls you out of being constantly in that, I just have to think, if we don't pull ourselves out, we're stuck in there like a box, right? Anything that'll help you get out of that. Go to an improv class, pull yourself out of your comfort zone to do something where it's completely spontaneous or creative, because you're disrupting that pattern of always being stuck in this. Again, remembering that rationality and reason is the faithful servant. It's our useful tool, but it's not always the way that we're best able to comprehend things from the start. That'll also sharpen your awareness. That's the contemplative practices. They're essential. I would think if you wanted, they're the basic. You have to meditate and find the shoe that fits. I started meditating with mindfulness and it did not work for me at all because I was anxious. I was in New York during 9/11 too, and that was not working for me. I was just more mindful that I was anxious. So I learned through breathing, which is why I ended up doing research with veterans with the sky breath meditation practice. Find the practice that works for you. Find the shoe that fits for you, and maybe it's sitting in your church for an hour in silence. Whatever works, right? So training yourself for that inward gaze as opposed to constantly the outward gaze, especially in a society that wants us to only do that. It's very radical. It's very different. You're not going to get your best insights after 4 beers kind of thing either. You know what I mean? So you just got to be in that mental space where it's just your mind is clear.
What do you say to somebody would be like a good first step to start to regain some sense of control and autonomy in their life so it doesn't get worse?
This is going to be the easiest answer on the planet. And I know what people are going to do when they listen to this answer. They're going to go, it can't be that easy. So my chimpanzee brain must complicate it because surely the answer must be more complicated. And the answer is this: get jacked, get lean and jacked. Because if you feel out of control, you don't know what's going on in the world, maybe your marriage is falling apart, maybe your work and your business is falling apart, maybe everything around you is falling apart and you have zero control over that. You have absolute control over what you eat. You have absolute control over how hard you work out. You have absolute control over your sleep patterns. And you have absolute control into letting what thoughts and ideas and information come in. You do those things, get lean, jack, athletic, and start changing the information that's coming into you, right? Input determines output. And then all of a sudden you're like, dude, I'm looking great. I'm jacked, I'm muscular, I'm lean. If I could control this human animal, I can certainly control other elements around me. That's why I say fitness is the gateway drug to an awesome life.
Yeah, I mean, your habits determine everything. And I so agree with you that fitness is that gateway drug, because there's not many things that give you self-confidence, good endorphin rush, better community, better sleep, better stress management, everything else than fitness. For the person who has been sitting on the couch for the last like 10 years, 10 months, and they're like, all right, I want to get jacked, but I've tried the program where I just go from 0 to 100 and I've fallen flat on my face. I've tried this and I just have started too quick. Like, where do you suggest somebody start to make progress that actually lasts?
Well, maybe instead of going from 0 to 100, they just go 0 to 10. So if you've been like, if there's a indentation on the couch where your was, then maybe first thing we do is we get you to just maybe walk 3 miles a week. And that's 1 mile every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then we just go in the gym after that for 30 minutes and actually bring it. Like, bring the workout. Don't just look at your phone and sit on the bench press and start tweeting and twatting, but instead actually bring it. And then just skip the sugars and skip the heavy carbs and eat more protein. Try doing that 5 days a week. So you got 2 days a week of being a heathen animal, but 5 days a week of actually eating clean. Those simple things going from 0 to 10, you're like, dude, I'm getting stronger. My cardiovascular is improving. I might go a 4th day a week. I might actually add another mile to my daily walk or run. Or that walk might turn into a jog, turns into a run. Because when we try and go from nothing to all, we go very quickly from all to nothing, right? And that never works out.
Yeah, it never works out. And I think one of the other things that holds people back, and I know you've had your struggles of limiting beliefs, I've had my struggles of limiting beliefs, is they're like, all right, I'm never going to achieve this thing, or my parents told me that I was a loser growing up, or whatever the story is. Yeah. Like, what advice do you have for somebody who's trying to like overcome some of these limiting beliefs that have been just living in their mind for the last?
And that's a real thing, man. Dude, for me, like, I was molested as a kid. Growing up between the ages of 4 and 6, I was molested by 2 older boys. And then we escaped the Soviet Union, come to the United States, and then I'm bullied by all the neighborhood gangbangers because we're living in Section 8 housing. And so there's a lot of limiting beliefs in my head. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough. You know, I can't trust people, right? And so that used to haunt me. So imagine if I said, Doug, you and I are about to do a 100-meter race. The only difference is that I'm going to put this 50-pound kettlebell, I'm going to handcuff it to your ankle. You are now at a deficit. There's no way there's any chance, no matter how good of an athlete you are, with the 50-pound kettlebell wrapped around your ankle, that you're going to beat me at this 100-meter race. That's what those stories are that we have in our heads. Yes, trauma happened, bad things happened, bad people did bad things. But at the end of the day, you took all these stories, and instead of processing them, healing through them, working with the therapist, reading books, doing the self-mastery work, self-development work, you took those stories and then you started kind of weaving them together and building it into your identity. And then you start looking in the world to go, okay, well, you know what? I'm introverted. I'm always anxious. I'm always depressed. I hate people and I can't trust people. That's become your identity because of the stories that you've lived. Then you go, aha, see, that guy's shady, that guy's shifty. You start looking for evidence in the world to justify how you feel, which then re-engineers your story. So I got an idea. The human condition is we're all going to feel some level of suffering, adversity, hardship, trauma. What if we can actually heal through it, work with a good coach, mentor, therapist, read a book, take a course, and when you heal and process through it, you're no longer walking around with all these open sores on your body. That's how I envision limiting beliefs. They're a byproduct of trauma or bad things that took place in your life. You didn't heal through it, so you've got all these open sores, and you're bumping into other people that have open sores, and you're like, ouch, hey, watch it, that hurt. Well, it hurt because I've got open wounds, you've got open wounds. If we could just heal when we shake hands as friends, it won't be so painful.
What were some of the things that helped you, like with your limiting beliefs personally? I mean, I know you talked about your story and what happened to you as a kid. I know you struggled with panic attacks, anxiety, like all these things that you had going on in your 30s, and now you've come out on the other side of that. And I know it's, like you said, it's not an easy thing. What helped you?
It's not. It's a journey, right? And I think one of the highest purpose of any human, the highest purpose is self-mastery, because you and I are born. No one hands us a owner's manual that goes, hey, here's how Doug operates. Here's how Bedros operates. No one. And then our parents just do the best they can by guessing, oh, well, he likes having music on when he sleeps. Okay, got it. Oh, look at that. He likes sunny days over cloudy days. And so they kind of start telling you, hey, these are the things we think you like. But really, there's no game plan, there's no owner's manual. And I think our creator has made it that way so that we go, all right, I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have emotions. That's one plane that I live on. I have a physical body here that I could strengthen or let weaken, but ultimately over time, it's going to decay and get old. So I live on the emotional feeling plane. I live on the physical plane as this human body, but then I'm also radiance. I have a soul, I have a spirit, I have this energy, I have a consciousness that I want to connect to the higher power with. So I live on 3 different planes. Holy crap. And there's no owner's manual, so I better start figuring myself out. That is the highest level of purpose that we could achieve, which is self-mastery. Start working on self first. Heal yourself. And then you can go, all right, how do I want to serve the world? What do I want to give to the world? Maybe it's a product, service, whatever the thing is. But that comes after healing yourself and developing into the highest version. So where I started, now I'm 49 now, at the age of 38, I had a massive panic attack. Building up to that, I'm trying to build a franchise, Fit Body Bootcamp. I have a coaching business that's doing okay, but not great. I have a software company that's just trying to take off. Then I have a marriage and I have kids, right? And then all that with this trauma and this pain and this stories that I've told myself that I'm an immigrant and so they don't like me here in this country. And I always get the short end of the stick and I have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard as everybody else. All right, well, at some point, thankfully, I had that panic attack at the age of 38. Dude, I thought it was a heart attack. It was so scary. I thought I was having a heart attack. And so I went to the doctor. I was like, dude, I think I had a heart attack. They checked me. Okay, no heart attack. You're fine. We think you had a panic attack. And I'm like, well, I do have a pretty stressful life and I am pretty overwhelmed. And so they put me on Xanax. That is not the solution. I can tell you that. The pharmaceutical drugs they put you on to mask the symptoms of what you're feeling is not the solution. So thankfully, 4 days in, I call the doctor. I'm like, look, dude, this thing makes me numb. I have no creativity. I have no desire to work. I don't want to take Xanax because I'm going to go bankrupt. What's my other solution? He goes, how about talk therapy? Have you worked with a therapist to maybe work through your I was like, well, that's for broken people. I don't need that, right? And so, but reluctantly, I went and found a good therapist, Kevin Downing, out here in Brea, California. And he said, give me 4 weeks and I can give you some tools to work with your anxiety, to help you cope with your anxiety. And he did. He taught me halt. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, deal with it instead of ignoring it and then flipping out, right? Like the alcoholic, if he's hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, he's more likely to go back to drinking. So address that stuff, process through it, eat, sleep, get love and connection, rest. So they taught me anxiety is anticipation of future pain, which was like a big light bulb for me. I'm like, holy crap. Okay, anxiety is anticipation of future pain. So really, I'm living in the future, anticipating something going wrong with a business partnership, with my marketing system, with a sales team, with a whatever. And so I'm freaking out over something that hasn't even happened yet, but has the potential to happen. But if I just have a conversation and fix it before it goes bad, which was the third thing he taught me, which is action alleviates anxiety. So he teaches me this over like a 4-week period. And I'm like, Kevin, I used to have this constant feeling of anxiousness in my gut. I don't have it anymore. So that was the end of our sessions. And he said, hey, before you leave, is there anything else you want to work on? I was like, no, everything else is fine, man. Peace. You taught me what I needed. Well, as it turns out, because he did such a good job in those 4 weeks in building rapport and trust with me, he goes, what about your parents? I'm like, nah, everything was fine with my parents. My dad was a little heavy-handed, former communist. I go, plus what happened to me in the old country was far worse than any, slapping around and beating my dad would have given me. I threw that little nugget out. And he was like, what happened? And that's where we kind of opened up the can of worms about the fact that I was molested as a child by 2 older boys. And the weight of that kind of carried into my adulthood. We spent the next 15 months, man, talking through it. So that's what did I do? I did talk therapy with a good therapist who was able to help me process through what happened and help me work through the shame, the rage, the confusion that I had. I read many books on self-help, like The Body Keeps the Score, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, How to Heal, like dozens of books. I started doing hard things that were out of my comfort zone. This is when I started doing these 6-week challenges because I was like, you know what? Tony Robbins always says the fastest way to change your mental and emotional state is to change your physical state. I've always said that I'm a lifter. God's designed me to lift weights, yet I've always been kind of interested in running. Like, could I run a marathon if I really needed to? I'd never even run a mile. And so I hired a running coach, trained for 6 weeks, and then ran a marathon. And that broke so many limiting beliefs. That made me realize that what other areas of my life have I been doubting myself in that I could actually break through? So for me, it was physical challenges, it was books and courses, and it was working with a therapist. And some of the sessions with Kevin, dude, I would walk out of his session. It was like walking through molasses. It was just like walking through this, like trudging through this thick molasses where you're foggy headed, you're emotionally spent, you just feel gutted. And the next 2 days, you're just walking through molasses. But you have to go through that, I believe, to be able to heal and come out the other side. 15 months later, I was a new man. And I know it because my business hockey sticked, my relationship got better. People would come up to me and go, dude, you look lighter. Something about you looks lighter, better, like you're not carrying this weight. Like, what is up with you? Like, I think I had this dark cloud over my head, anger, rage, and I didn't even realize it. So healing looks like that. There is no one way to heal. It's a multi-pronged approach to heal, and it takes time, but it's worth the work.
It's worth the work, and congrats on everything that you've overcome with all of that. And I think that, like, going back to the beginning, a lot of people still have like this, they have this dark cloud over their heads. And you've talked about like how trauma can play a massive role in that. But I also think sometimes people just make it worse based on their habits, where they're spending time with the wrong people, they're not sleeping well. We talked about the importance of exercise, which we can get back to, nutrition, what they're watching on TV. Like, what are some of the things that are often overlooked by people that are just destroying their life on a daily basis?
You know that. It's like, okay, well, I got this, let's say I got this trauma. I was traumatized because I was molested by 2 older boys for 2 years. Okay, so maybe drinking might trigger that. Maybe high levels of stress might trigger those feelings more. Maybe people in my life who are not aligned with my core values, not congruent with the way I want to live my life, might trigger those things, right? And so it's funny that we have these traumas, these limiting beliefs, these self-doubts, and then we end up surrounding ourselves with people who don't align with our core values. They make us, not make us, but they encourage us to, because no one can make you do anything. They encourage you to stay out late, eat foods, spike your insulin, take all this caffeine and energy drinks and Adderall and stimulants, where now you're super anxious. Because we're all, what is all that stuff? Sugar, carbs, caffeine, Adderall, drugs. Anything that stimulates your system is energy. Well, anxiety is energy that needs to be released. And so why am I doing that? And then you start having those dark, scary thoughts because now you got all these this energy. Oh my God, I have to cope with it somehow. Let me smoke some weed. Let me drink some alcohol to escape from my reality, to numb myself, to bring myself down. But that's only a vice that is masking the problem. The next day you wake up and you feel guilt for, one, spiking your energy, and then 2, down-regulating with alcohol and weed. You're hungover. You didn't get anything done. You feel about the friends that you have, the food that you eat. So you start by, what's the overlooking thing? Your circle of influence. Like, curate who's in your circle of influence. That's number 1. In fact, Dan, oh man, I forget his name. It's not Dan Kennedy, it's a Dan something, who says the 2 highest determining factors of your success or failure in life are the thoughts that occupy your mind and the people you surround yourself with. Dan Sullivan, right? So Dan Sullivan says, if you can curate who's hanging around with you, if me and Doug have the same core values, we have the same mission in life, we are driven by serving humanity, we're going to hang out together. But if all of a sudden Pedro starts drinking, snorting cocaine, hanging out with a lot of hookers, you're like, bro, that's not the lifestyle I want to live, and that's actually going to take me off track from my goal. I'm like, come on, bro, let's just do one line of cocaine off that hooker. You'll be fine, right? You have to disconnect from this relationship. Otherwise, I'm taking you down with me. And so it's important to understand if you can control your environment, your circle of influence. So you have to eliminate or edit people, number one. Number two, control the input, the thoughts that occupy your mind, social media, news media, even. So, we run this thing called the project. And it's a very polarizing thing. We take men, a group of men, 15 to 35 men, and for 75 hours straight, we put them through physical, mental, emotional suffering, run by a Navy SEAL, a Marine, myself, an MMA fighter. And we also have a lot of school time, meaning they sit at a desk, they learn life structure, how to develop their core values, their life's mission and purpose, et cetera. So it's not just beating them down, log carries, ice baths, truck pulls, long hikes. It's not just that for 75 hours. But it's very polarizing. And when we put out the videos on social media, we leave out those videos that show them in the classroom setting. We show the really cool stuff. But some of the cool stuff is also these angry instructors yelling at them, at grown men. And so we have a lot of trolls who have dedicated specific YouTube shows or YouTube channels to on the project. Cool. I'm cool with that. Freedom of speech, do what you want. I understand that on my journey to success and to serving humanity, I will be misunderstood. Even Jesus and Gandhi and Mother Teresa have websites and YouTube channels that are dedicated to on them. So what absolves me from that? However, someone who I know on Instagram, but I'm not friends with, I've never met in person, but he comments a lot. He's usually a good person. He sent me a link to one of those videos of a troll on the project and how we're grifting and how we're this and how we're that, because they don't really see how we serve these men. And some of these men are damn near suicidal, and we help them not end life. He sends me this link, and he probably had the best of intentions. And I said, hey, do me a favor. Don't ever send me anything like this again. You can imagine already a ton of people are sending me that. Pedros, did you see this YouTube channel talking on the project? I need to control the input, because if I see enough of that, I'll begin to wonder, maybe I should stop doing the project. Maybe it's a little too much the way we deliver it. Maybe we should re-edit the videos so it's not as violent. But it's the violence, emotional, physical, mental violence that attracts the men into it. And so I have to curate my thoughts, the input, the information that comes in, my circle of influence, and then, of course, what I ingest and digest, the food, the water, the alcohol, et cetera, because that all has a chemical reaction in my body. That said, the fourth and final thing is I have to be physically active. I think the most overused source of antidepressants are pharmaceutical drugs and food, and the most underutilized source of really feeling better and overcoming your anxieties and depression is exercise. And so if I can exercise on a regular basis, even when I'm tired, even when I'm sad, even if I didn't sleep well, even if it's cold, even if it's raining outside, even if I got bad news, still gonna go out, do my workout, because it releases dopamines, and dopamines make me feel good, and I earn those dopamines instead of taking them from drugs or alcohol or vape or whatever. I'm usually going to have a good life if I can keep those four things under control.
There's a couple things I wanted to dive into. I think, first, just based on what you just said, I think a lot of times, I've been a trainer for over 12 years, and when people get busy, when people get stressed, they tend to forget about exercise and eating well, which I believe that's the time to really double down, because that's going to help, I think, that much more. And I think it's just so important. And you see just the everyday people do this a lot. So how do you win that battle of the mind on a daily basis? Because, you got a lot going on. I'm sure there's days you're tired, exhausted. How do you win that battle?
It's a battle that can't be won through motivation or self-inspiration or having Doug inspire me, motivate me, pump me up. It has to be internal. And the only thing internal is discipline. Because then when I'm, like I said, when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I didn't sleep well, I had nightmares, maybe me and the wife got into an argument. And so whatever. Discipline says that I have to live a structured life, and that I need to work out, I need to eat right, I need to have a structured schedule in order to be able to run this big machine called HQ, where we have 5 or 6 businesses running out of here. And so some days I go to the gym under protest. I don't go there, yippee, it's exciting, I can't wait. I go there under protest. In fact, Leighton's worked out with me before. Some days, most days, I'm mumbling to myself and talking to myself and, literally coaching myself through the workouts in a positive way. Then there's those days that I woke up angry and bitter and didn't feel like going, so I'm going to the gym under protest, but I'm going anyway because of discipline. And then those days, I might be using very choice words that are not so motivational, not so inspirational. I'm just cussing up a storm at the dumbbells, at the pull-up bar, at the turf that I'm pushing the sled on. But guess what? I got it done anyway because discipline forces me to have structure. Motivation is fleeting.
And I think one of the other things that kind of helps people stay accountable and keep going is like being accountable to somebody else and having a mentor and having people coach them. I know you coach some of the most successful people in my industry, in your industry, and that you've had mentors along the way too. And you mentioned that you don't let the feedback from your project event like consume your mind. But I also know that you have people in your corner that you bounce off ideas off of and people who maybe give you some constructive feedback. So how can people balance those two? Because I feel like sometimes people are just so overconsumed with like negativity and stuff online, or they're the opposite where they think they know everything
Right.
and they push everybody away.
Yeah. And the solution to that I found as I've gotten older is ego. The more I can control my ego, put it aside, because ego kind of puts on blinders and you stop seeing the version of yourself. You stop seeing the arrogant version of yourself. You start surrounding yourself, if you're very egotistical, you start surrounding yourself with yes men and yes women who just want to appease you. If you can put the ego aside and go, hey man, give me honest feedback. Give me honest feedback. I need to improve and I don't know what I don't know. And you guys have outside eyes on me. I trust your core values. I trust the kind of man you are. I love the character and the integrity that you walk in. Same with you and same with you. So here it is, guys, brutal, honest feedback. I may get hurt, but give it to me anyway. And so it's imperative to do that. Most people don't do that because, well, you are going to get hurt. It doesn't feel good when a friend says, B, this is how you show up sometimes. Oh, shit, I didn't realize I show up like a bull in a china closet. And then immediately we go to defense. Yeah, but the reason I was like that on that day is because I got some bad news from a coaching client and he was upset and I wanted to help him, but I couldn't. And so I came into HQ kind of red hot, And so I didn't really mean, see, B, you're actually now being defensive about it. You asked me for feedback. And so you have to just sit there, put your ego aside, take the feedback. And then oftentimes I'll ask, well, can you give me examples? Give me examples. And instead of being defensive about it or explaining why it was that way, I go, got it, understood. So that's how you saw it? Yep. And that's how it made you feel? Yep. First off, I'm sorry. Secondly, it won't happen again. We need to ask for feedback. We need to cultivate feedback from people that we are aligned with in core values, character, and integrity, that we feel that, we honor them, we respect them. Because I won't go get feedback from someone who is fat and sloppy and out of shape and sloth-like because we just don't share the same vision, man.
I think that's ultimately one of the biggest mindset shifts that people need to make is their relationship with pain and how they know they need to like figure out a way to deal with that and not use it as an excuse to drink more alcohol or smoke the weed or get into all these other.
It's easier to do that. It's easier to go to the escape tools. I'm going to watch so much TV that I don't think about my mom or my tricep until I get fat and ugly and right. It's easy to do it. Or I'm just going to drink and smoke until the pandemic's over. But now I've lost 500 locations instead of 200. You have to address the thing. And you have to address it in the most inefficient way. And the most inefficient way is to actually problem solve through it. The efficient but horrible way to do it is let me just smoke and drink and vice myself through it, but it only gets worse on the other side of it.
So what are some of the things that you would recommend somebody doing if they're faced in the thick of adversity? Maybe they're lacking the discipline that you have, but they're trying to work their way there when they've hit this roadblock and they don't know what to do.
Well, number one, build the life structure, the support system, your community, your circle of influence, control the thoughts and the input. Do all of that, the discipline, do all of that before the life ambush comes. Like if you're watching this and listening to this and you're like, life is pretty good right now. Great. Build a better circle of influence around you. Build a better structure, more discipline, get your workouts in, learn to eat right so that when the inevitable, not maybe, inevitable life ambush comes, you could lean on that. Now, if you're like, oh, I have no life structure. Everyone around me is a loser. I don't work out. I don't eat right. I'm smoking and drinking my way through the days. I feel horrible. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I just feel like the world is over. And I just got some bad news. I just hit the X of ambush. Holy hell. Well, you know what? You do the 3 C's. You control what you can. You cope with what you can't control, and you concentrate on what counts. So in that moment, you're like, what can I control? Well, I can control my thoughts right now. I can control if I'm alone or if I'm talking to friends who actually care for me, love on me, and pour into me. I can control a workout. Maybe I don't want to go to the gym on my own because I don't trust myself. I'll walk out after doing 1 set. Somebody be like, hey, Doug, hey, Ed, can you guys come to the gym with me? Let's work out together. I'm in a dark place. I'm going to lean on my community. I'm going to start reaching out, but I'm not going to be the lone wolf, because the lone wolf dies, the wolf pack survives. I'm going to trust on my pack, control the controllables, cope with what you can't control in that moment or in that phase of life, and then understand that you have to concentrate on what counts. And there's only a small handful of things you need to concentrate on. Like, am I working out? Am I eating right? Do I have a good circle of influence? You know, am I showing gratitude for even being alive? And maybe you're like, actually, I don't want to be alive right now. I don't want to be alive right now. So I'm not grateful for being alive. Oh, okay. There's a dude with like 1 leg and 1 prosthetic leg hobbling through life. You got 2 working legs. So maybe if you just compare yourself and realize maybe it's okay to be alive. Maybe I do have it better than some people. And this is just a phase of life, and this too shall pass. And we have to look at it that way. If we don't, we start making these permanent decisions while under temporary feelings. And that is the worst way to lead yourself through life.